Hey guys, tonight we are stepping back into the thick, swirling mists of the 19th century to see if you have what it takes to navigate the most powerful, and arguably the smelliest, city on Earth. Imagine stepping off a creaking wooden steamer, the damp air of the Thames clinging to your skin like a wet wool blanket. The world is a cacophony of shouting dock workers, clattering hooves on slick cobblestones, and the distant, rhythmic thud of industry. It's grand, it's ambitious, and honestly, you probably won't survive this. Between the contaminated water and the fact that basic traffic laws are more of a polite suggestion, the odds are stacked against you from the first breath of coal smoke. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd love to know where you're listening from tonight, so feel free to drop your location and your local time in the comments. It's always a bit surreal to see how far these stories travel while we're all tucked away in our own corners of the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You pull your coat tighter as you stand on the edge of the London docks, your eyes stinging from the London particular. That infamous P, soup fog. It isn't just mist, it's a thick, yellowish, black soup of coal soot sulphur and the particulate remains of a million chimneys. It tastes like metal and old pennies. To your left, a mountain of tea chests is being unloaded from a clipper ship that's just spent months at sea. To your right, a group of mudlarks, children barely older than 7, are scavenging through the low tide muck for scraps of rope or coal. The year is 1850, and you are standing in the beating heart of the British Empire. It is a city of staggering contrasts, where a gentleman in a silk top hat might step directly over a man sleeping in the gutter without a second thought. Historians still argue whether the extreme wealth of the Victorian era truly trickled down to the working classes, or if it simply widened the chasm between the elite and the destitute. For now, your main concern isn't macroeconomics, it's the fact that a massive horse-drawn omnibus is barreling toward you, and the driver has no intention of slowing down. Walking in London is a sensory assault. The streets are paved with granite setts, which sound like a rolling thunderclap when hit by the iron-rimmed wheels of hundreds of handsome cabs. You notice quickly that the mud on the road isn't just dirt. It's a slurry of rainwater, coal dust, and an incredible amount of horse manure. In fact, thousands of tons of street sweepings are deposited on London's roads every single day. If you want to keep your dignity and your trousers clean, you'll need to find a crossing sweeper. These are usually young boys or elderly men who keep a small path clear of muck in exchange for a halfpenny. It's your first lesson in the Victorian economy. Everything, even a clean step, has a price. The sheer scale of the city is overwhelming. Over 2 million people are packed into this space, making it the largest city in the world at the time. You pass a street vendor, a coster, shouting about fresh eels, and the smell of fried fish mingles with the scent of gin from the palace on the corner. These gin palaces are a sight to behold, with their etched glass, gas lamps, and mahogany counters. They are designed to be the only bright, warm places in a slum, a momentary escape from the damp reality of a one-room tenement. You might feel a bit of a tickle in your throat from the smog, a common Victorian ailment, while the rich might head to the coast for the sea air. You're stuck with the local remedy, a thick lozenge that likely contains more opium than actual medicine. It's a quirky bit of 19th century life that while alcohol was heavily taxed and scrutinized, you could walk into a chemist and buy potent narcotics over the counter as easily as a bag of sweets. In fact, many soothing syrups for crying infants were laced with laudanum, leading to a generation of very quiet, very dazed toddlers. As you push further into the city, toward the financial district of the City of London, the architecture shifts. The cramped, timber-framed houses of the medieval past are being torn down to make way for massive stone temples of commerce. This is the era of the Great Stink and the Great Expansion. You see the massive iron skeletons of new railway bridges cutting through ancient neighborhoods, a literal manifestation of progress slicing through the past. There is a frenetic energy here. Everyone is moving, selling, or searching. You find yourself following a crowd toward the Royal Exchange, where the air is thick with the talk of stocks, cotton prices, and colonial expansion. It's easy to get lost in the grandeur, but don't let the shiny brass buttons of the passing beadles fool you. The Bobby, or Peeler, the newly formed police force, is watching the crowds for pickpockets. You instinctively check your pockets. A Poggle hunter or pickpocket specializing in silk handkerchiefs could have you cleaned out in seconds. The sun begins to set, though sunset in London is really just a deepening of the gloom from grey to charcoal. The gas lamps are being lit by men with long poles, the flickering flames casting long, distorted shadows against the soot-stained brick walls. It's a beautiful, eerie transition. You realize that to survive here, you can't just be strong, you have to be adaptable. You have to know which alleys to avoid and which ordinaries. The fixed-price eateries serve food that won't leave you clutching your stomach by midnight. Historians often point to the 1850s as a tipping point, where the traditional ways of life were finally crushed under the weight of the machine. But as you stand there, watching a newsboy scream the latest headlines about the Crimean War, it doesn't feel like a textbook entry. It feels loud, dirty, and terrifyingly alive. You aren't just a visitor, you are a participant in a grand experiment of human density. As you prepare to find your first night's lodging, remember that the city never truly sleeps. The bells of St. Paul's chime in the distance, muffled by the fog, reminding you that time is moving forward, whether you're ready for it or not. You've made it through your first hour in the capital of the world. Your boots are a bit muddy, your lungs are a bit heavy, and your pockets are, hopefully, still full. This is just the beginning of your Victorian education. Tomorrow, the real work of staying alive starts. The night air in Victorian London doesn't bring a cooling breeze, it brings a settling of the soot. As you navigate the winding arteries of the city, you realize that your primary enemy isn't a shadowy villain in a cape. It's the ground beneath your feet. The mud you encountered at the docks has followed you inland, but here in the crowded residential districts, it takes on a more sinister character. It is a thick, gelatinous paste known to locals as street soil. If you're wearing the fashionable long skirts of a lady or the tapered trousers of a gentleman, you've already made a tactical error. Every step is a gamble, and the stakes are your health and your dignity. Historians still argue whether the invention of the elevated sidewalk or the implementation of Joseph Bazalgette's massive sewer system did more to save the average Londoner's life. But in the mid-1850s, neither has fully reached the streets you're treading. You are currently walking through a literal minefield of biological hazards. To survive the transit, you need to master the Victorian shuffle. This involves keeping your weight on your toes and scanning the ground 3 feet ahead for deposits left by the city's 50,000 working horses. A single slip doesn't just mean a trip to the laundry, it means an introduction to a cocktail of bacteria that would make a modern doctor faint. You stop at a street corner looking for a way across a particularly wide junction near Holborn. Here, the traffic is a chaotic swarm of hansom cabs, heavy dray wagons pulled by massive shires, and the occasional private carriage of a nobleman. There are no stop signs, no painted lines, and certainly no mercy for the slow. This is where you encounter a staple of the London streetscape, the crossing sweeper. Usually a young boy with a broom twice his size, he spots your look of hesitation. For a copper coin, he will vigorously sweep a narrow path through the slurry, creating a temporary bridge of relatively clean cobblestones just for you. It's a quirky bit of social infrastructure. a private enterprise for public hygiene. As you cross, you notice something strange about the buildings lining the road. They are coated in a layer of black grime so thick it looks like velvet. This is the patina of progress. Every coal fire in every parlour and every furnace in every factory contributes to this coating. A mainstream historical fact often overlooked is that during the peak of the Victorian era, the smog was so dense it could actually cause night at noon, forcing the city to light its gas lamps in the middle of a Tuesday. You see people pressing damp cloths to their faces, an early and largely ineffective version of a smog mask. You probably won't survive the long-term respiratory effects if you stay here too long, but for tonight, you just need to keep moving. The mud isn't the only thing you have to dodge. Look up and you'll see the slop threat. In the poorer districts, where plumbing is a fantasy, the upper stories of tenement buildings often dispose of grey water, and worse, by simply tossing it out the window. While the medieval cry of Gardyloo has faded, the practice remains. If you hear a window creak open above you, it's best to jump toward the center of the street, even if it means risking a collision with a butcher's cart. It's a constant game of vertical and horizontal spatial awareness. You might find it interesting that the very mud you're avoiding is actually a valuable commodity. A fringe tidbit of Victorian life is the existence of the pure finders. These individuals roamed the streets not for coal or metal, but for dog droppings, which they collected in buckets and sold to tanneries in Bermondsey. The pure was used to soften leather for expensive gloves and bookbindings. So, while you are doing your best to keep the street off your shoes, someone else is making a living by picking it up. It's a reminder that in this city, nothing is wasted and everyone is part of a giant, grinding machine of survival. As the evening progresses, you notice the crossing sweepers retreating to their own dark corners. The social hierarchy of the street is rigid. The pavement belongs to those who can afford to keep it clean, and the gutter belongs to the rest. You see a sandwich man, a person wearing 2 advertising boards shuffling along the curb. He is a human advertisement, a common sight and a grim reminder of how cheap labor is. For a few pence a day, he walks miles in a wooden cage, promoting a sale on umbrellas or a new play at the Lyceum. He doesn't speak, he just moves with the tide of the city. The streetlights, those flickering gas lamps, cast a sickly green glow over the wet stones. They are beautiful from a distance, but up close they hiss and spit. They are fed by a network of pipes that frequently leak, leading to the occasional subterranean explosion. It's just another day in the life of a Victorian. You learn to appreciate the link boys who carry torches to guide people through the darker alleys, though you have to be careful. Some link boys are in league with local gangs and might lead you straight into a dead end, where their friends are waiting to relieve you of your watch and coat. You find yourself standing near a public pump, a heavy iron handle chained to a stone base. A few people are filling buckets, despite the water having a slightly cloudy yellowish tint. This is the era of the Broad Street pump incident, and though John Snow is starting to prove that cholera is waterborne, most people still believe in miasma, the idea that bad smells cause disease. You know better, hopefully, and decide to satisfy your thirst later with a bottled ginger beer or a pint of ale. In Victorian London, water is a gamble, but beer is a processed, boiled certainty. Your feet are aching, and the damp cold of the London night is beginning to seep through your soles. You've learned that the city isn't just a place, it's a physical opponent. You've successfully navigated the filth, avoided the airborne slops, and dodged the thundering hooves of the transit system. But as you look down at your boots, now caked in a greyish crust, you realize that cleanliness is next to godliness wasn't just a moral proverb, it was a nearly impossible physical goal. You've survived the labyrinth of mud, but the city has plenty more ways to test your constitution. For now, find a dry doorstep and rest your eyes because the morning brings a whole new set of hazards, starting with what the Victorians call breakfast. The morning light in London doesn't so much break as it does seep through the curtains of smog, a dull, bruised purple that eventually settles into a flat grey. You wake up with a stomach that is already complaining, a hollow reminder that you haven't eaten since you stepped off that steamer. It's time to face the Victorian breakfast, a culinary experience that is less about nutrition and more about a high-stakes game of chemical roulette. You head toward a small coffee shop tucked into a narrow lane near Cheapside, hoping for a simple loaf of bread and a steaming cup to start your day. But here is the catch: in this era of unregulated commerce, you probably won't survive the ingredients. As you sit at a scarred wooden table, the waiter brings you a slice of bread that looks surprisingly white and fluffy. In a world where whole grains are seen as peasant food, white bread is a status symbol. However, to achieve that pristine snowy look, the local baker has likely added a generous dusting of alum, a chemical used in dyeing and tanning, and perhaps a bit of plaster of Paris or even pulverized bone. Historians still argue whether the widespread English pallor of the 19th century was caused by the lack of sunlight or the steady diet of slow-acting poisons found in basic staples. You take a bite and it's oddly gritty. That's the stone dust, a little extra filler to make the baker's flour go further. Next comes the milk. It looks thin and slightly blue, a common sight in London, where the liquid is often stretched with water from the same pumps we've already established are suspicious. To give it back its creamy consistency and hide the bluish tint, it's not uncommon for suppliers to whisk in a little sheep's brain or a dash of chalk. A quirky fringe tidbit of the time is that the swill milk, produced by cows kept in filthy city cellars and fed on fermented distillery waste, was so acidic it could actually rot the teeth of the children who drank it. If you're smart, you'll skip the milk entirely and stick to the tea, provided the tea leaves haven't been recycled by drying out used leaves and dyeing them with iron filings to make them look fresh. Despite the hidden dangers, the Victorian food scene is incredibly vibrant. Outside the shop, the cries of London are beginning. You hear the muffin man ringing his bell, carrying a heavy tray of crumpets on his head, and the watercress girl, who is likely no older than 8, selling bundles of greens she picked from a stream at 4 in the morning. These greens are often the only source of vitamins for the poor, though since the streams are usually downstream from a tannery, you're basically eating a side of industrial runoff with your breakfast. It's a harsh reality where even the fresh food is fighting against you. If you're feeling adventurous, you could try a Savoy, a highly seasoned, bright red sausage. It's the ultimate Victorian mystery meat. While it smells delicious when fried, there's a persistent urban legend, sects, which has some basis in fact that a significant portion of London's stray cat and dog population eventually finds its way into the sausage grinder. You decide to pass on the Savoy and instead watch a gentleman at the next table tuck into a bowl of potted meat. This is a Victorian delicacy, but because refrigeration is virtually non-existent, the meat is often preserved with borax to hide the smell of decay. It's a testament to the Victorian digestive system that the entire city doesn't simply keel over by lunch. The lack of food safety laws meant that for much of the 19th century, the Adulteration of Food Act was either non-existent or toothless. You are living in the Wild West of chemistry. You might see a jar of bright green pickles in a shop window and think they look appetizing, but that vibrant color is achieved by boiling the pickles with a copper penny or adding copper sulfate. It makes the food look alive, even if it's doing the opposite to you. Your best bet for survival is to eat food that you've seen cooked at a high heat right in front of you. A hot potato from a street brazier is relatively safe, assuming the vendor hasn't used lead-based paint to decorate his cart. As you finish your gritty bread, you might crave something sweet. Be careful with the sugar plums and brightly coloured candies sold to children. The reds are often lead chromate, and the yellows are arsenic-based. It's one of those dark ironies of the age. The more beautiful and colourful something looked, the more likely it was to kill you. You begin to realise why the Victorians were so obsessed with fortifying themselves with tonics and bitters. They were constantly fighting a low-grade battle against their own pantry. The social aspect of eating is just as complex as the ingredients. If you were at a high society breakfast, you'd be navigating a forest of specialised cutlery. But here in the mid-range shops, it's a hurried affair. People eat with a sense of urgency, fueled by the pressure of the industrial clock. The hour for lunch is a luxury not everyone affords. Most workers grab a hand-held meal, like a meat pie from a street stall. These pies were famously nicknamed Bow-Wow Mutton for a reason. You start to understand why the local alehouses are so popular, at least with beer. The fermentation process kills off the worst of the water-borne pathogens, making a pint of small beer the safest thing you've had all day. You leave the shop feeling a bit heavy and perhaps a little nauseous, which you tell yourself is just the London nerves. But as you walk, you notice a dustman collecting the household refuse. In the Victorian circular economy, even the scraps you didn't eat have a destination. Vegetable waste goes to the pig farms on the outskirts, and coal ash is sold to brickmakers. Everything is repurposed, except perhaps for your health. You've survived your first Victorian meal, but the chemical cocktail in your system is a ticking clock. Remember that crocodile dung sunscreen we talked about in another life? Well, here, you'd be lucky if the dung stayed on your face. In London, you're likely eating a microscopic amount of the city's filth with every breath and every bite. The struggle for a pure life in a city of adulteration is your new full-time job. You've navigated the mud and the menu now. You need to find a place to lay your head that doesn't involve sharing a room with 10 strangers and a family of bedbugs. But keep your chin up, at least the coffee was hot, even if the beans were mostly roasted chicory and charred sawdust. After a day of dodging horse-drawn chaos and digesting plaster-filled bread, the weight of the Victorian night begins to press down on your shoulders. Your limbs are heavy, and the damp chill of the fog is starting to find the gaps in your waistcoat. You need a bed. But in a city where the population has exploded from 1 million to nearly 3 million in just a few decades, space is the most expensive luxury of all. If you aren't part of the upper 10,000, with a townhouse in Belgravia, your options for sleep range from the cramped to the truly bizarre. You probably won't survive a week of this sleep deprivation, but tonight you're just looking for any port in the storm. You find yourself standing before a doss house in Spitalfields. The smell hits you before you even cross the threshold, a pungent mixture of unwashed wool, cheap tobacco, and the sour tang of humanity packed too tightly together. For a few pennies you have options. If you're truly destitute, you might opt for the penny sit-up, where you are literally paid a penny to sit on a wooden bench all night, forbidden from sleeping, just to stay out of the rain. But you've got 4p in your pocket, which earns you the infamous 4-penny coffin. You enter a long room filled with rows of wooden boxes, each about the size of a man, lined with a thin, hay-stuffed mattress. It's not quite a bed, but it's yours for the next 8 hours. Historians still argue whether these crowded lodgings were the primary breeding grounds for the era's frequent typhus outbreaks, or if the lack of ventilation was the greater killer. As you climb into your wooden crate, you realize the coffin nickname isn't just a grim joke. It's a literal description of the space. You're lying shoulder to shoulder with strangers, separated only by thin planks of pine. Above you, a single gas jet flickers, casting long, skeletal shadows across the ceiling. There is no privacy here. You can hear the rhythmic snoring of a dock worker to your left and the soft, ragged cough of someone who likely has the consumption, to your right. It's an intimate, terrifying glimpse into the shared struggle of the London poor. If you're lucky, the proprietor has at least changed the straw in the mattress this month. A quirky fringe tidbit of the Victorian lodging industry is the 2-penny hangover. This wasn't a drink, but a sleeping arrangement where a long rope was stretched across a room, and for 2 pence you could lean over it and sleep standing up. In the morning, the lodging house keeper would simply untie the rope to wake everyone up at once, a literal drop into the workday. Compared to that, your wooden box feels like a palace. You try to settle in, but the Victorian wildlife has other plans. Bedbugs, or mahogany flats, as the locals call them, are a standard feature of any affordable mattress. You'll spend half the night scratching and the other half wondering if that scurrying sound is a mouse or a particularly bold rat. The noise of the city doesn't stop just because the sun is down. Through the thin walls, you hear the clatter of the night, soilmen beginning their rounds, emptying the cesspits of the neighbourhood into horse-drawn carts. It's a thankless, vital job that keeps the city from drowning in its own waste, though the smell drifting through your window suggests they're losing the battle. You might recall that crocodile dung sunscreen we discussed. Honestly, at this point, the scent of ancient Egyptian cosmetics sounds like a perfume compared to the reality of a Spitalfields midnight. You pull your coat over your head, trying to create a pocket of breathable air. There's a strange social code in these houses. Despite the misery, there is a sense of community. Someone shares a crust of bread, another tells a tall tale about their time in the merchant navy. It's a republic of the wretched. However, keep your boots tucked under your head. Theft is rampant, and a pair of sturdy leather boots is worth more than a week's wages to some of your roommates. You've learned that in London, you sleep with one eye open and your valuables held tight. The Newgate Calendar, a popular publication detailing the lives of famous criminals, is full of stories that started in places just like this. You might wonder why people didn't just sleep in the parks. Well, the Vagrancy Act made it a crime to be homeless, and the Peelers were quite efficient at moving people along with a firm poke of a truncheon. The Doss House, for all its filth, is a legal sanctuary. It's a symptom of a society that is terrified of the undeserving poor. You are caught in a system that demands you work to have a home, but makes the conditions of your home so wretched that you can't possibly get enough rest to work. It's the classic Victorian trap. As you lie there, you think about the model lodging houses being built by reformers like Lord Shaftesbury. They offer clean water, separate beds, and even, heaven forbid, a bath. But those places have strict rules: no drinking, no swearing, and a mandatory lights out. For many Londoners, the freedom to be miserable in a 4-penny coffin is preferable to the disciplined charity of the upper classes. It's a debate about dignity that still echoes in modern social work. Is it better to be managed into health or left to your own devices in the muck? The gas light eventually dips low, and the room settles into a chorus of wheezes and groans. You find yourself drifting off, the rhythmic thump of the city acting as a distorted heartbeat. You've survived the mud, the toxic breakfast, and now you've found a place in the urban hive. You are one of the millions of units that make the empire function, even if the empire doesn't seem to care where you put your head at night. When you wake up, your back will ache, your skin will be mapped with bug bites, and your throat will be dry from the coal dust that has settled on your tongue. But you'll be alive. You'll climb out of your coffin, shake the straw from your coat, and step back out into the grey light to do it all over again. Tomorrow, we'll look at how you dress for this madness. Because if you're going to survive the Victorian era, you need to look the part, even if your clothes are literally trying to poison you. For now, try to find a few minutes of dreamless sleep before the rope is untied and the world starts screaming again. The morning air in your lodging house is thick enough to chew, but as you shake the straw from your hair, you realize that looking respectable is your only shield against the crushing weight of social judgment. In Victorian London, your clothes aren't just fabric, they are a manifesto of your rank, your character, and your hygiene. You need to dress the part of a survivor, but as you pull on your layers, you're entering a battlefield of aesthetics. The 19th century wardrobe was a masterpiece of tailoring and a literal death trap. From the dyes in your socks to the structure of your silhouette, you probably won't survive the fashion trends of the day. If you're a woman, your first challenge is the crinoline, a massive bell-shaped hoop skirt made of horsehair or, more dangerously, spring steel. It's the height of 1850s chic, creating that iconic, floating silhouette. However, the crinoline is a logistical nightmare and a fire hazard. Historians still argue whether the thousands of deaths attributed to crinoline fires, where a lady's skirt would brush against an open hearth and ignite like a torch, were a result of feminine vanity or simply the era's lack of safe heating. One quirky and terrifying fringe tidbit is that in 1863 alone, it was estimated that 3,000 women died in crinoline-related blazes. You have to navigate narrow doorways like a ship passing through a rocky strait, all while keeping a safe distance from every candle and fireplace in London. Then there is the colour. You see a beautiful, vibrant shade of Giles green in a shop window and think it would look lovely for a promenade in Hyde Park. Don't touch it. That brilliant emerald hue is achieved by using copper arsenite, yes, arsenic. As you sweat under the ballroom lights, your skin absorbs the poison, leading to sores, nausea, and a slow, agonizing decline. It's a dark irony. You're literally a femme fatale, but the person you're killing is yourself. Even the artificial flowers in your hair are likely dusted with the same toxic powder. To be a fashionable Victorian is to be a walking chemical hazard. For the gentleman, the dangers are subtler but no less real. Your high, stiff collar, known as the father killer, is starched to a razor-sharp edge. It looks impeccable, but it's so restrictive that if you happen to fall asleep in a chair after a few too many brandies, the collar can actually compress your carotid artery and finish you off. Meanwhile, your top hat is likely lined with mercury-treated felt. The Mad Hatter wasn't just a whimsical character in Lewis Carroll's imagination. Mercurial erethism was a common industrial disease for hatters, causing tremors, paranoia, and hallucinations. You're wearing a hat that's slowly eating your mind while you try to look like a pillar of the community. You might remember that crocodile dung sunscreen we discussed. It almost seems quaint compared to the lead-based face powders used to achieve the consumptive look. In the Victorian era, looking slightly ill was actually a trend. The pale skin, dilated pupils, achieved with belladonna eye drops, and flushed cheeks of a tuberculosis patient were seen as the height of fragile beauty. You are essentially poisoning your skin with lead and your eyes with nightshade to look like you're at death's door, which, thanks to your wardrobe, you actually are. The construction of these clothes is another marvel of the age. This is the era of the sewing machine, which has revolutionized the ready-to-wear market. But this efficiency comes at a cost. The sweated labor in East End garrets means your beautiful waistcoat was likely stitched by a woman working 18 hours a day in a room with no ventilation and a single candle. There is a persistent scholarly debate over whether the pathogenic nature of Victorian clothing, carrying germs from the slums into the parlours of the rich, was a primary factor in the spread of scarlet fever. You aren't just wearing silk and wool, you're wearing the biological footprint of the city's poorest districts. As you step out onto the street, you have to manage your train. If your skirt is long, it acts as a highly efficient street sweeper, picking up a cocktail of horse manure, expectoration, and general gutter filth. When you return home and shake out your skirts, You're releasing all those dried pathogens into your unventilated bedroom. It's no wonder the Victorians were so obsessed with stale air and miasma. Their very clothes were bringing the corruption of the street into the sanctuary of the home. The social pressure to conform is immense. A man without gloves is a man without a future. A woman without a corset is a lose woman in more ways than one. The corset itself is a mechanical marvel of whalebone and lacing, designed to rearrange your internal organs for the sake of a 20-inch waist. While the fainting couch is a common trope, it was a practical necessity. When you can't take a full breath because your ribs are being squeezed into a new zip code, a sudden shock or a warm room will send you right over the edge. You'll find yourself reaching for smelling salts, ammonium carbonate, just to stay conscious during a conversation about the weather. Despite the danger, there is an undeniable majesty to the Victorian silhouette. The rustle of silk, the shine of the silk hat, and the rhythmic clack of leather heels on stone create a sensory symphony of status. You feel important. You feel like a citizen of the world's greatest empire. You just have to ignore the rash under your emerald green sleeves and the slight tremor in your hands from the mercury in your hat. As you walk toward the West End, you realize that fashion in 1850 is a form of armor. It protects you from the indignity of being mistaken for a laborer, but it's a heavy, toxic weight to carry. You've mastered the mud, you've survived the bread, and now you look the part. You're a polished, poisoned, and perfectly dressed Victorian. But as the sun begins to climb and the temperature rises, the smell of the city starts to interact with the heavy wool of your coat. It's a reminder that beneath the lace and the starch, the great stink is waiting to claim the summer. Tomorrow, we'll see how you handle the atmospheric reality of a city that has completely run out of places to put its waste. The heat of a London July in the mid-19th century isn't a dry, pleasant warmth. It is a heavy, humid blanket that traps every stench the city has to offer. As you step out in your layers of wool and starched linen, you notice the air feels different, thicker, almost oily. People are walking with handkerchiefs pressed firmly to their noses, and the usual chatter of the street has been replaced by a grim, hurried silence. You are about to witness the great stink of 1858, a summer so foul it literally brought the gears of the British Empire to a grinding halt. In a city where miasma is feared like a vengeful ghost, you probably won't survive the atmospheric assault of a river that has effectively died. The Thames, once the shimmering pride of London, has become a 200-mile-long open sewer. Because the city's population exploded faster than the infrastructure could manage. Every household's waste, every slaughterhouse's offal, and every factory's chemical runoff flows directly into the water. To make matters worse, the introduction of the water closet, a modern marvel you've likely enjoyed, actually exacerbated the problem by flushing massive amounts of waste into cesspools that then overflowed into the river. Historians still argue whether it was the smell itself or the fear of a looming plague that finally forced Parliament to act. For you, standing on Westminster Bridge, the smell isn't a strong odour, it's a physical presence that you can feel on the back of your throat. The situation is so dire that the windows of the Houses of Parliament have been draped in curtains soaked in chloride of lime to neutralise the stench. You see MPs rushing out of the building, gagging into their silk handkerchiefs as the river bubbles with fermenting gases. A quirky fringe tidbit from this summer is that the heat was so intense the river actually began to boil in certain stagnant patches, releasing plumes of methane and hydrogen sulfide that could be smelled miles away in the countryside. There were even rumours of birds dropping dead from the sky as they flew over the water. You find yourself wondering if the crocodile dung sunscreen of the ancients might have served as a better olfactory barrier than your meagre linen hanky. As you walk, you notice that the city's obsession with miasma has reached a fever pitch. At the time, The prevailing medical theory was that diseases like cholera and typhus were spread by bad air or foul smells, while we now know it was the contaminated water. The terror of the great stink was rooted in the belief that the smell itself was a messenger of death. You see street vendors selling onti, miasma, bouquets of dried lavender and rosemary, which people clutch as if they were holy relics. It's a desperate attempt to create a personal bubble of scented air in a city that smells like a titan's compost heap. The social order begins to fray under the olfactory pressure. The wealthy flee to their country estates in the shares, leaving the working class to bake in the urban oven. You pass a public pump where people are still drawing water, despite it being downstream from a sewer outlet. This is the tragic irony of the Victorian era. While the elite was suffocating from the smell, the poor were drinking the cause of it. The cholera map, created by Dr. John Snow a few years prior, is finally starting to gain traction in scientific circles, but for the average person on the street, the stench is still the enemy. You watch a woman fill a bucket with water that looks like weak tea, and you have to fight the urge to knock it out of her hand. If you think you can escape by heading indoors, think again. The lack of ventilation in most buildings means the smell of the street is simply trapped and concentrated. In the tenements, the air is stagnant and heavy with the scent of unwashed bodies and night soil. Even in the grandest mansions, the plumbing is often so primitive that sewer gases burp back up through the pipes and into the living rooms. You realize that in 1858, there is no such thing as a fresh breath of air in the entirety of London. It is a shared, democratic misery that ignores the boundaries of class. However, out of this disgusting summer came one of the greatest engineering feats of the age. You see men in mud-stained trousers surveying the embankments. This is the beginning of Joseph Bazalgette's massive intercepting sewer system. It's a mainstream historical fact that this project, comprising over 100 miles of street sewers and 82 miles of main interceptors, is what truly saved London and ended the era of the great epidemics. It was a gargantuan undertaking of brick and iron that literally redirected the city's waste away from the river and out to the sea. You are standing at the exact moment where the medieval city ends and the modern, sanitized metropolis begins. But Bazalgette's pipes aren't finished yet. For now, you have to survive the day-to-day reality of the stink. You learn to time your movements with the tides. When the tide is out, the mud is exposed to the sun and the smell reaches its peak. You find yourself seeking refuge in the high, ceilinged naves of churches or the marble halls of the British Museum, anywhere that the stone might retain a bit of cool, filtered air. Even there, the scent of the Thames follows you like a persistent shadow. It's a reminder that no matter how much gold the empire brings home, it hasn't yet figured out how to clean its own doorstep. As the sun sets, a fiery orange ball obscured by the permanent haze, the city doesn't cool down. The bricks of the buildings hold the heat, radiating the day's misery back onto the streets. You find a spot in a small park far from the riverbanks and try to breathe through your mouth. The great stink is a testament to the cost of rapid progress. It's the sound of a city reaching its breaking point. You've survived the mud, the food, the toxic clothes, and now the very air you breathe. You are becoming a veteran of the Victorian struggle. Tomorrow, we'll move away from the gutters and into the drawing rooms to see if the rules of etiquette are any easier to navigate than the sewers. But as you drift off to sleep tonight, your head resting on a damp pillow, the faint, lingering scent of the river reminds you that in London, everything is connected. The tea you drink, the clothes you wear, and the air you breathe are all part of a giant pulsing and occasionally stinking organism. Keep your handkerchief close and your eyes on the horizon. The wind has to change eventually. As the great stink eventually dissipates with the changing of the winds, you realize that surviving London isn't just about dodging physical hazards. It's about navigating the invisible, razor-sharp wires of social conduct. In the Victorian era, a social blunder can be just as fatal to your future as a dose of arsenic-dyed bread. You are stepping into a world where every gesture, from how you hold your teacup to how you tip your hat, is a coded signal of your worth. It is a dense, high-stakes performance, and honestly, you probably won't survive the first afternoon tea without making a fool of yourself. One wrong move, and you'll find yourself cut by society, effectively rendered invisible to anyone who matters. The foundation of this social minefield is the calling card. You can't just knock on someone's door and expect to be seen. That would be barbaric. Instead, you must present a small, engraved card to a servant. There is a whole language of dog ears involved. Folding the upper right corner means you've come in person, while the lower left means you're taking your leave of the city. Historians still argue whether these intricate rules were designed to foster genuine politeness or were simply a ruthless mechanism for the middle class to gatekeep their newly acquired status from the nouveau riche. You stand on a doorstep in Belgravia, sweating in your mercury-lined hat, wondering if your card is the right weight of ivory cardstock. Once you are finally admitted to a drawing room, the real trial begins. You must master the Victorian sit. This involves perching on the edge of a mahogany chair, never leaning back, as that implies a lack of moral backbone, and keeping your hands perfectly still. Fidgeting is seen as a sign of a weak mind. You are surrounded by knick-knacks, porcelain figurines, dried flowers under glass domes, and perhaps a taxidermied squirrel, all of which are covered in the same soot you've been breathing. A quirky and slightly morbid fringe tidbit of the time is the popularity of memento mori, jewelry such as rings or brooches made from the hair of deceased loved ones. You find yourself complimenting a lady on her beautiful woven bracelet, only to realize you're admiring the hair of her late great Aunt Martha. It's a delicate balance of being appreciative without being morbidly curious. Conversation is a tightrope walk. You must avoid heavy topics like politics, money, or the fact that the Thames currently smells like a grave. Instead, you stick to the safe subjects: the weather, the latest exhibition at the Royal Academy, or the perceived health of the Queen. If you're a man, you must never smoke in the presence of a lady, and you must never, under any circumstances, mention a lady's legs. They are limbs, and even mentioning them is a one-way ticket to social exile. You might remember the crocodile dung sunscreen of the past. Well, here, the sunscreen is a layer of stifling politeness that prevents anyone from saying what they actually think. Then there is the ceremony of tea. This isn't just a drink, it's a religious rite. You are handed a cup of bone china, so thin it's translucent. You must not clink your spoon against the side of the cup, and you must never, ever blow on the liquid to cool it. You simply wait for the laws of thermodynamics to do their work while maintaining a pleasant, vacuous smile. If you are offered a cucumber sandwich, you must eat it in 3 polite bites. To eat it in one go is to admit you are hungry, and in the Victorian drawing room, having physical needs, like hunger or the need to breathe, is considered slightly common. Out on the street, the etiquette continues. If you see a lady you know, you must wait for her to acknowledge you first. A gentleman never presumes to speak to a lady unless she gives the nod. And when you bow, the depth of your bend is a precise calculation of the social distance between you. If you bow too low to an equal, you look like a sycophant. If you don't bow low enough to a superior, you look like a revolutionary. It's no wonder the nervous exhaustion, or neurasthenia, became a fashionable diagnosis later in the century. The sheer mental load of remembering who to tip your hat to is enough to make anyone want to retreat to a darkened room with a bottle of smelling salts. A mainstream historical fact that often gets lost in the stiff upper lip trope is that the Victorians were actually deeply emotional people. They just believed that character was forged by the suppression of those emotions in public. This created a strange, shadow world of etiquette. You might hate the person sitting across from you with every fibre of your being, but you will spend 20 minutes discussing the merits of his rose garden with exquisite grace. To break the facade is to break the social contract. You are a participant in a grand, collective illusion of order in a city that is fundamentally chaotic. Even the way you walk has rules. A gentleman walks on the curbside of the pavement to protect the lady from the splashes of the passing carriages and the street soil. We've already discussed. You are a human shield against the muck. If a puddle is too wide, it's not uncommon to see a gentleman lay down his coat. Though, given the cost of tailoring and the sheer filth of the water, this was more of a romantic literary trope than a daily reality. Most of the time, you just guided her toward the nearest crossing sweeper we met earlier. As the afternoon light begins to fade, you find yourself exhausted not from physical labor, but from the performance. You've successfully navigated the calling cards, the hair jewelry, and the cucumber sandwiches without a single clink of the spoon. You are, for now, a respectable member of society. But as you leave the drawing room and step back into the cool evening air, you realize that this etiquette is a cage as much as it is a shield. It keeps the city civilized, but it also keeps people at a distance. You've survived the mud, the food, the toxic fashion, and the social minefield. You are becoming a true Londoner, someone who can stare into the abyss of a polluted river and then discuss the nuances of a sonnet without blinking. But all this refined living can take a toll on your health, and in the Victorian era, the cure is often more terrifying than the disease. Tomorrow, we'll visit the local chemist and the surgeon's theatre to see why you should be very, very afraid of falling ill. For now, take a deep breath through your nose as etiquette dictates, and be glad you didn't accidentally mention anyone's limbs. The strain of maintaining a stiff upper lip and inhaling coal dust has finally caught up with you. You wake with a rattling chest and a fever that makes the floral wallpaper of your lodgings seem to pulse and writhe. In the 21st century, you'd reach for an aspirin and a glass of filtered water. In Victorian London, you are entering a realm of medical, heroic therapy, where the line between a cure and a lethal dose of poison is thin enough to shave with. You need a doctor. But honestly, you probably won't survive the treatment. In an era before the widespread adoption of germ theory, your physician is just as likely to bleed you dry as he is to wash his hands before touching your open wounds. You start at the local chemist's shop, a place of wonder and terror. The walls are lined with glass jars containing everything from dried beetles to dragon's blood, resin. Because there are no prescription laws, you can buy practically anything if you have the coin. For your cough, the chemist suggests a popular, soothing syrup. You take a swig and feel an immediate, blissful numbness. That's because the primary ingredients are likely a heavy dose of morphine and a splash of high-proof alcohol. A quirky fringe tidbit of the era is the sheer ubiquity of patent medicines. Unregulated tonics like Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup, which was so potent it was nicknamed the baby killer, for its habit of putting infants into a sleep they never woke up from. You're feeling better already, mostly because you're too high to care that you're still sick. If the chemist's narcotics don't work, you'll have to call for a proper physician. Historians still argue whether the transition from miasma theory to contagion theory in the mid-19th century saved more lives than it cost during the confusing years of overlap. Your doctor arrives smelling of horse sweat and stale tobacco. He doesn't wear gloves. In fact, his frock coat is stiff with the dried blood and laudable pus of previous patients, which he wears as a badge of experience. He decides your humus are out of balance and suggests a course of leeches. You watch as he applies the slimy annelids to your chest. It's a mainstream historical fact that millions of leeches were imported into London every year. They were the Spearin. of the age, used for everything from headaches to broken legs. As you lie there, leaking blood into your hay, stuffed mattress, the doctor might suggest a mercurial rub. For any other ailments you might have, mercury or quicksilver was the Victorian go-to for anything chronic. The fact that it causes your teeth to fall out and your mind to wander was simply seen as a sign that the medicine was working. By purging the body, you might recall that crocodile dung sunscreen from earlier. At this point, a little lizard waste seems positively hygienic compared to being smeared with liquid metal. If you're truly unlucky, he'll prescribe calomel, a mercury-based purgative that will ensure you spend the next 12 hours in a state of violent, dehydrating misery. But perhaps your condition is worse. Perhaps you need the knife. If you have to go to a London hospital like St. Thomas or Guy's, you are entering a theatre in every sense of the word. Surgery is a public spectacle. Before the 1840s, speed was the only mercy. A skilled surgeon could take off a leg in under 30 seconds, while the patient was held down by 4 burly assistants. By your time in the 1850s, ether and chloroform have arrived, which is a blessing, but they come with their own risks. There are no anesthesiologists, just a medical student with a rag and a bottle, hoping he doesn't stop your heart while trying to knock you out. You find yourself on the wooden table, the air thick with the smell of sawdust to soak up the blood and the sweet scent of chloroform. Even if the surgery is a success, the real danger is just beginning. Hospitalism, what we now call a staph infection, runs rampant. Surgeons believe that good pus is a sign of healing, and they often use the same silk thread to stitch up 5 different people without cleaning it. You have a 50% chance of surviving the infection that follows the operation. It's a grim lottery where the prize is merely living to see another foggy Tuesday. If you prefer alternative medicine, you could try hydropathy, which involves being wrapped in freezing wet sheets for hours on end, or galvanism, where doctors apply electric shocks to your limbs to reanimate your nervous system. The Victorians were obsessed with the vital spark of life and believed electricity could cure everything from paralysis to hysteria. You might find yourself strapped to a brass-bound battery, twitching like a frog's leg in a laboratory, while a doctor solemnly checks his pocket watch. It's a time of frantic experimentation where the patients are the lab rats. Despite the horror, this is also the era of Florence Nightingale and the birth of professional nursing. The shift toward cleanliness, ventilation, and organized care is beginning to flicker in the darkness of the wards. People are starting to realize that maybe, just maybe, dumping sewage into the drinking water and not washing surgical tools is a bad idea. But these ideas are still fringe to the old guard of the medical establishment. To survive as a patient, you need a constitution of iron and a lot of luck. As your fever finally breaks, more likely due to your own immune system than the leech's, you feel a strange sense of accomplishment. You've survived a Victorian cure. You are weaker, paler, and your gums feel a bit sore from the mercury, but you are still breathing. You've navigated the toxic city, the toxic food, and now the toxic medicine. You're becoming a permanent fixture of this 19th century landscape, a survivor in the truest sense of the word. But being healthy enough to walk again means you have to go back to work. And in London, work doesn't mean sitting at a laptop. It means getting your hands very, very dirty. Tomorrow, we'll follow the mudlarks and toshers down into the guts of the city to see how the other half, the bottom half, earns enough to buy a 4-penny coffin. Rest up and try not to scratch those leech bites. We have a long day in the muck ahead of us. Now that you've survived the physician's leeches and the chemist's narcotics, it's time to earn your keep. In the Victorian world, if you aren't born into land or a lucky trade, your labour is the only thing standing between you and the dreaded workhouse. You step out into the dawn, the sky the colour of a bruised plum, and head toward the river. You aren't going to a factory or an office. You are joining the ranks of the street folk, the invisible army that scours the city's veins for survival. You are becoming a mudlark. It is a job that requires no tools, no education, and a complete lack of a sense of smell. Honestly, you probably won't survive the infections waiting for you in the tidal muck, but the tide is going out, and your stomach is empty. You climb down a slippery, slime-coated ladder at Blackfriars, your boots sinking instantly into the cold, grey-black silt of the Thames. This is the foreshore, a landscape of debris that only appears twice a day. You are surrounded by children as young as 5 and elderly women in tattered shawls, all stooped over like wading birds, their eyes scanning the muck. Historians still argue whether mudlarking was a desperate survival strategy of the sunken sixth, or a surprisingly organized informal economy that kept the city's waste from piling up. For you, it's a search for river, fine scraps of coal dropped from barges, old nails, bits of rope, or if the gods are smiling, a lost copper coin or a memento from a passing ship. The mud is a chemical cocktail of everything we've discussed: sewage, industrial runoff, and the occasional carcass of a stray animal. A quirky and particularly gruesome fringe tidbit is that mudlarks occasionally found human remains, which they would report to the authorities only if there was a reward involved. Otherwise, they'd simply move on to the next patch of silt. You find a piece of coal the size of a fist and tuck it into your pog, the makeshift pocket in your apron. That's a half farthing right there. You might recall that crocodile dung sunscreen we joked about. Out here, the thick river mud serves as its own kind of protective layer, though it's protecting you from the wind while simultaneously trying to rot your skin. If mudlarking is too public for you, you could try your hand as a tosher. These are the aristocrats of the underworld, the sewer hunters who venture deep into the brick-lined tunnels of the city's drainage system. They carry long poles with hooks and lanterns strapped to their chests, wading through waist-deep slurry in search of silver spoons or jewelry dropped down drains. It is a mainstream historical fact that the Toshers were terrified of the Queen's breath, a pocket of methane gas that could ignite or suffocate a man in seconds. They lived in a world of perpetual darkness, dodging sewer rats the size of small dogs. It was a lucrative trade, but one that left you smelling so foul that even the hardiest gin shop might turn you away. As the sun rises higher, you see the pure finders we mentioned earlier, and the bone grubbers who collect animal bones from the gutters to sell to the glue factories. You realize that the Victorian city is a giant recycling machine. Nothing is too small or too disgusting to have a value. You spend 6 hours in the mud, your fingers numb and your back screaming in protest. Your haul for the day is a handful of rusty nails, 2 lumps of coal, and a Georgia Thur copper penny that's been worn smooth by the water. It's barely enough for a bowl of peas pudding and a seat in a lodging house, but it's honest work in a city that often demands far worse. The social stigma of this work is immense. To the middle-class Victorian walking across the bridge above you, you are a feature of the landscape, no more human than the stones of the embankment. You are part of the great unwashed. This class divide is reinforced by the New Poor Law, which ensured that life in the workhouse was so intentionally miserable, the food so bland and the labour so repetitive, people would rather scavenge in the river than ask for parish. You are choosing the mud over the Bastille, as the poor, the was of the poor, called the workhouses. It's a testament to the human spirit, or perhaps just a testament to how terrible the porridge was in the Union House. Conversation among the mudlarks is sparse. Everyone is a competitor for the next find. However, you might hear talk of the dustmen, who are the titans of the waste industry. They collect the ashes from people's homes, which are then used to make the very bricks that are building the new suburbs of London. There is a strange circularity to it. The waste of the old city provides the foundation for the new. You look at the penny in your hand and wonder whose pocket it fell out of. A merchant, a sailor, a thief. In the mud, all money is equal. As the tide begins to rush back in, a cold and relentless surge of grey water, you scramble back up the ladder. You are covered in a layer of river crust that will take hours to dry and days to truly wash off. Your lungs feel heavy from the damp air of the foreshore, a reminder that consumption or tuberculosis is always lurking in the shadows of the working class. You've survived a day in the Victorian gig economy, where the boss is the tide and the payroll is whatever the city vomited up last night. You've mastered the mud, the toxins, and now the labor. You are no longer a visitor, you are a piece of the city's machinery. But even the hardest working mudlark needs a break. Tonight, we're going to take those few coppers you earned and head toward the bright lights and thick smoke of the music hall. We'll see how the Victorians let off steam when they aren't fighting for their lives in the muck. Wash your face as best you can in a bucket of rainwater, because even in the penny gaffs, there's a standard to maintain. The mud of the Thames is still drying in the creases of your elbows, but the sun has finally dipped below the horizon, and the gas lamps are humming with a life of their own. You have a few coppers clinking in your pocket, the hard-won spoils of a day spent scavenging, and the crushing weight of Victorian reality needs to be lifted. If only for a few hours, you follow the sound of a jaunty out of tune fiddle and the smell of roasted nuts toward a music hall. This isn't the refined atmosphere of the opera house. This is the rowdy, smoke-filled, democratic heart of London's nightlife. You probably won't survive the second-hand smoke or the projectile vegetables if the act is bad, but for a shilling, you can forget you're a mudlark. You push through the swinging doors, and the heat hits you like a physical blow. The air is a thick, swirling soup of tobacco smoke, cheap gin, and the scent of several hundred people who haven't bathed since the last bank holiday. This is the era of chairmen, men who sit at a central table banging a gavel to introduce the acts and keeping the crowd from turning into a riot. Historians still argue whether the music hall was a tool for social control, giving the working class a safe place to vent their frustrations, or a breeding ground for radicalism. To you, it just feels like the loudest place on earth. You find a seat at a long, sticky wooden table where people are drinking heavy wet, stout and shouting at the stage. The first act is a serio, comic singer, a woman in a dress so bright it would make a peacock blush, singing a song about a husband who spent the rent money on pigeons. The crowd joins in on the chorus, a deafening roar of voices that rattles the rafters. A quirky and slightly bizarre fringe tidbit of the music hall scene was the popularity of specialty acts, which could include anything from posture artists, who contorted their bodies into the shapes of famous statues, to men who claimed they could eat an entire raw sheep for a wager. You watch a man balance a full-sized kitchen table on his chin while reciting Shakespeare. It's absurd, it's magnificent, and it's exactly what you need to drown out the memory of the Queen's breath in the sewers. You might remember that crocodile dung sunscreen from our earlier chats. Well, in here, the only thing protecting your skin is a layer of condensation from the ceiling. The music hall is a sensory overload. Waiters, or potmen, weave through the crowds with trays of pewter mugs, while orange girls sell fruit and nuts. If an act is particularly terrible, the audience doesn't just boo, they throw things. It's a mainstream historical fact that performers often had to dodge peltings of orange peels, old crusts, or even dead cats if they missed a note. You see a juggler narrowly avoid a flying cabbage, and he doesn't even break his rhythm. That's professional dignity. Victorian style. Conversation at your table is a mix of flash, slang and neighborhood gossip. You hear someone mention a penny gaff, a cheaper, even more disreputable version of this hall, often set up in the back of a shop, where the plays are blood and thunder melodramas about Jack Sheppard or the spring-heeled Jack. The Victorians had a bottomless appetite for the macabre. Even in their fun, there's a sharp edge of survival. You realize that, for these people, the music hall isn't just entertainment. It's a communal act of defiance against the grime of their daily lives. The main event of the evening is a lion comique, a male performer dressed as an exaggerated version of an aristocrat with a monocle, a cane, and a silk hat. He sings a song mocking the very swells who look down on the crowd, and for a moment, the class hierarchy of London is flipped on its head. Everyone in the room feels like a king. You find yourself pounding the table and singing along, the vibrations of the music making the copper penny in your pocket dance. It's a rare moment of pure, unadulterated joy in a city that usually demands nothing but toil. However, keep an eye on your surroundings. The swell mobsmen, expertly dressed pickpockets, love the music hall. They look like gentlemen, but they can lift your thimble. Let's watch while you're distracted by the chorus of "The Man on the Flying Trapeze." You've learned by now that in London, even your leisure time requires a defensive posture. You pat your pocket, making sure your few coins are still there. The music hall is a microcosm of the city, vibrant, dangerous, and utterly unpredictable. As the night nears its end, the chairman bangs his gavel for the final toast to the Queen. It's a curious blend of patriotism and ribaldry. You step back out into the cool London night, and the silence of the street feels heavy after the cacophony of the hall. The gas lamps are flickering low, and the London particular is starting to settle again. You feel a bit light-headed, partly from the gin and partly from the sheer energy of the crowd. You've survived a night on the tiles, and you didn't get hit by a single vegetable. Tomorrow the fun is over. We're leaving the bright lights of the capital and heading north into the dark, rhythmic heart of the Industrial Revolution. We're going to see where the cloth for those arsenic-dyed dresses is actually made, and why the dark satanic mills were more than just a poetic metaphor. The air will be different there, colder, sharper, and filled with the scent of machine oil and cotton dust. But for tonight, the songs are still ringing in your ears. Close your eyes and let the rhythm of the music hall fade into the background. The jaunty chorus of the music hall is still echoing in your ears, but as you board a soot-streaked train heading north, the melody is slowly drowned out by a heavy, mechanical thrum. You are leaving the merchant heart of London for the industrial lungs of the empire. Places like Manchester, the Cottonopolis of the world. As the carriage rattles, you see the horizon transform from the spires of churches to a forest of red brick chimneys, each belching a thick, oily smoke that turns the noon sky into a permanent twilight. You are entering the world of the mills, and honestly, you probably won't survive the atmospheric pressure of the dark satanic mills. Here, the pace of life isn't dictated by the sun or the seasons, but by the relentless iron heartbeat of the steam engine. You step off the train and are immediately hit by the smell, a pungent mixture of coal smoke, machine oil, and size. A starchy paste used to strengthen cotton threads. The air is so thick with fluff or cotton lint that it looks like a soft, white snow is falling, even in the height of summer. This lint is your new silent enemy. Historians still argue whether the Monday morning fever, reported by mill workers, was a physical reaction to the dust or a psychological resistance to the grueling work week. For you, it's a tickle in the back of your throat that never goes away. You see workers with bisonosis, a lung disease caused by inhaling fibers, walking with a stoop, their faces pale and their chests tight. You enter one of the massive, integrated mills, a cathedral of industry 5 stories high. The noise is your first shock. It's not just loud, it's a physical force that vibrates in your teeth. Thousands of spindles and hundreds of power looms are clattering at once, a mechanical roar known as the mill clatter. Because the noise is so deafening, the workers have developed their own sign language, a complex system of me-mowing or lip reading and hand signals. A quirky fringe tidbit of the factory floor is that many workers actually went stone deaf within a few years, but they considered it a fair trade for the steady wages. You find yourself trying to shout to a piecer, usually a young child whose job is to duck under moving machinery to tie broken threads, but your voice is swallowed instantly by the iron leviathan. Mainstream historical facts often highlight the 1847 10 Hours Act, which sought to limit the working day, but in practice, the speed up means you are working harder than ever. The floor beneath your feet is slick with oil, and the temperature is kept hovering around 80 degrees Fahrenheit with high humidity to keep the cotton threads from snapping. You are essentially working in a mechanical tropical rainforest. You might recall that crocodile dung sunscreen we talked about out here. You'd give anything for a layer of protection against the oil, mist that settles on your skin and hair, turning everyone into a shimmering, greasy ghost. The danger isn't just in the air, it's in the iron. The machines have no safety guards. A loose sleeve or a long braid can be caught in a second, pulling a worker into the gears. This is why the half-timers, children who go to school in the morning and work the looms in the afternoon, are so vital and so vulnerable. They are small enough to scavenge the waste from under the machines while they are still running. You watch a girl no older than 10 dart in and out of the path of a heavy mule. Her movements as precise and dangerous as a dancer's. It's a high-stakes game of survival where the prize is a few pence and the cost of a mistake is a limb. Though, as we know from Etiquette, we should probably call it a limitation of her future. The social structure of the mill town is different from London. Here, the mill lord is your landlord, your employer, and your provider. You likely live in a back-to-back house built by the company, where you share a single outdoor privy with 20 other families. There is a scholarly debate about whether these company towns were a form of benevolent paternalism or a sophisticated system of debt slavery. You see the Tommy shop, where you are expected to spend your wages on overpriced goods, often paid in scrip rather than real coin. It's a closed loop of labor and consumption that keeps you tied to the rhythmic thud, thud of the engine. Despite the hardship, there is a fierce pride in the northern identity. These workers see themselves as the engine room of the world. You sit in a hush shop, so an unlicensed pub, after a 14-hour shift, drinking ale that tastes of smoke and iron. The conversation isn't about the Queen or the opera. It's about the chartists and the fight for the vote, or the latest improvements to the self-acting mule. There is a sense of collective power here that you didn't feel in the scattered slums of London. You are part of a class that is beginning to realize its own strength, even as the machines try to break your body. As the buzzer sounds at the end of the day, a mournful, mechanical wail that can be heard for miles, thousands of workers pour out of the brick gates, their wooden clogs clatter, clapping on the cobblestones. It is a sound unique to the industrial north, a rhythmic tide of humanity returning to their damp, cramped homes. You follow them, your clothes heavy with grease and your ears still ringing. You've survived a day in the heart of the machine. You've mastered the mud, the medicine, the music halls, and now the mills. You are seeing the full spectrum of the Victorian experience, from the silk-lined drawing rooms to the oil-slicked factory floors. But while the adults are fighting the machines, the children are facing a different kind of struggle, the classroom. Tomorrow, we'll step away from the looms and into the world of the 3 R's to see what the future of the empire is learning and why the discipline of the slate was almost as rigid as the gears of the cotton mill. Wash the oil from your hands as best you can. The schoolmaster doesn't tolerate blots on the page. The relentless thrum of the cotton mills begins to fade into a sharp, rhythmic clack, clack of wooden rulers hitting desks. You have traded the oil mist of the factory for the dry, stifling dust of the Victorian classroom. In the 1870s, education has become a legal requirement, but schooling is less about inspiration and more about industrializing the mind. You are standing in a high-ceilinged room with tall windows designed to let in light, but placed high enough so that you cannot see the world outside. The Empire doesn't want you dreaming, it wants you calculating. Honestly, you probably won't survive the boredom, let alone the discipline of a schoolmaster who views a smudge on a slate as a moral failing. You are seated on a backless wooden bench, your knees cramped against the desk in front of you. This is the era of the monitorial system, where one teacher oversees hundreds of students with the help of older pupil teachers. The air smells of damp wool, coal smoke, and the metallic tang of ink. Your primary tool is a heavy piece of slate and a slate pencil that makes a screeching sound, a noise that sets your teeth on edge every time you try to practice your copperplate. Handwriting. Historians still argue whether the 1870 Education Act was a genuine humanitarian effort or a desperate attempt to create a more obedient workforce that could read basic safety signs and instructions. To you, it just feels like a prison with more chalk. The curriculum is focused on the 3 R's: reading, writing, and arithmetic. You spend hours chanting tables in a monotone drone that sounds like a mechanical hive. 2 times 2 is 4, 3 times 2 is 6. This rote learning is designed to bake facts into your brain through sheer repetition. A quirky and somewhat cruel fringe tidbit of the Victorian school system was the use of the dunce's cap. If you are slow to answer or struggle with your sums, you are forced to stand on a stool in the corner wearing a tall, conical paper hat. It isn't just a punishment. It's a public shaming designed to use social pressure to enforce academic progress. You might recall that crocodile dung sunscreen we discussed. In the classroom, the only protection you have against the schoolmaster's wrath is a perfect memory and a silent tongue. Mainstream historical facts point to the revised Code of 1862, which introduced payment by results. This meant that a school's funding was directly tied to how many pupils passed their examinations. Consequently, your teacher is under immense pressure to make sure you perform, leading to an environment where the cane is a constant companion. If your mind wanders to the music hall songs of last week, a sharp sting across the knuckles reminds you that the Victorian god prizes industry over imagination. You see a boy next to you being clouted for using his left hand. In this era, left-handedness is often seen as a sign of a sinister or weak disposition, and children are forcibly retrained to use their right. The maps on the wall are a sea of pink. You learn the names of distant colonies, India, Canada, Australia, and the dates of kings and queens whose lives feel as remote as the stars. This is imperial education. You are being taught that you are a tiny, vital part of the greatest machine on earth. Even the needlework lessons for the girls are a form of discipline, teaching them to produce thousands of identical, perfect stitches. There is a scholarly debate over whether this rigid schooling actually stifled the very innovation the Industrial Revolution relied upon, or if the discipline it instilled was the secret source of British global dominance. During the play interval, you are ushered into a cramped, brick-paved yard. There is no equipment, no grass, just the grey walls of the city. You play games like hoop and stick, or oranges and lemons, the rhymes echoing with dark, historical undertones of execution and debt. Even your fun is a relic of the past. You might notice the half-timers we met at the mill arriving for their afternoon session. They are exhausted, their faces still streaked with oil, trying to focus on a grammar lesson while their bodies scream for sleep. The contrast between the pure students and the child labourers is a stark reminder of the Victorian social tiers. As you return to your desk, you are handed a copybook. You are to transcribe moral proverbs over and over. A stitch in time saves 9. Cleanliness is next to godliness. Idleness is the parent of vice. The goal is to ensure that even your subconscious is colonized by Victorian values. If you spill a drop of ink, it's not just a mess, it's a blot on your character. You learn to hold your breath as you dip your nib into the ceramic inkwell, terrified of the black smudge that could earn you a thrashing after the final bell. The school board man is another figure to fear. He roams the streets, hunting for truants, whose parents would rather they be out earning a few pence than sitting in a classroom. Education is a luxury that many poor families simply cannot afford, even if it is free. You realize that for many of your classmates, being here is a sacrifice of their family's next meal. It puts a heavy weight on every chalk mark you make. As the sun begins to dip, the gas lamps in the schoolroom are lit, casting long, flickering shadows that make the schoolmaster look 10 feet tall. You pack your slate and your few belongings into a satchel. Your head aches from the chanting, and your fingers are stained a permanent, bruised purple from the ink. You've survived a day in the Victorian knowledge factory. You are more literate than you were this morning, but you feel a little more like a cog in the machine than a human being. You've mastered the mud, the medicine, the music halls, the mills, and now the mandates of the classroom. You are becoming a well-rounded citizen of the 19th century. But as you step out of the school gates, you see a peeler watching the crowd with a suspicious eye. The law is everywhere in London, and its grip is tightening. Tomorrow, we'll see what happens when the rules are broken. We're heading into the Rookeries, the slums so dangerous even the sun seems to avoid them, to see how the new police handle the criminal underbelly of the city. Keep your head down and your pockets tight. The schoolmaster's cane is nothing compared to a truncheon. The sharp crack of the schoolmaster's ruler fades, replaced by the low, predatory hum of the London night. You are no longer in the starched environment of the classroom. You have wandered into the rockery of St. Giles, a place where the sun rarely touches the ground, and the law of the land is often superseded by the law of the knife. In the Victorian mind, this is a moral wilderness, a labyrinth of crumbling tenements and interconnected attics designed for a quick escape. Honestly, you probably won't survive a wrong turn here. The air is thick with the smell of cheap gin and shanty fires, and every shadow seems to have a heartbeat. You are about to meet the peelers, the blue-coated guardians of order, and the dangerous classes they are paid to suppress. You see a figure standing under a flickering gas lamp, a bobby, or peeler, named after Sir Robert Peel, the founder of the Metropolitan Police. He wears a reinforced top hat designed to withstand blows to the head and carries nothing but a wooden truncheon and a rattle ace, or, more recently, a whistle to call for backup. He is a mainstream historical fact of the 1850s, a symbol of the state's new desire to police by consent, though in the Rookeries, that consent is often hard to find. Historians still argue whether the police were created to protect the public or to serve as a domestic missionary force intended to beat middle-class values into the unruly poor. You watch him pace his beat with a steady, rhythmic tread, his eyes scanning the dark corners for anything out of place. Suddenly, a cry of "Stop thief!" echoes through the narrow alley. You duck into a doorway as a flat move or a runner bursts past you. This is the realm of the artful dodger types, though the reality is less Dickensian charm and more desperate hunger. A quirky fringed tidbit of the Victorian criminal world is the existence of thieves' kitchens, basement dens where young pickpockets were actually trained on mannequins draped in bells. If you could lift a silk, wipe, a handkerchief from a pocket without making a single bell jingle, you were ready for the streets. You might recall that crocodile dung sunscreen we discussed in the Rookeries. The only sunscreen is a layer of anonymity and a fast set of heels. If the police catch you, you aren't just going to a cell, you might be heading for the treadmill. The treadmill, or everlasting staircase, was a common Victorian prison punishment. It was a giant iron cylinder with steps that prisoners had to climb for hours on end, often grinding nothing but air. It was designed to break the spirit through monotonous labor. You see a peeler grab a young man by the collar, the Newgate collar, the grip on the neck, and begin the move on process. The police are constantly trying to prevent loitering, which is essentially the crime of being poor and stationary. You realize that in this city, the pavement is for transit, not for existing. If you find yourself the victim of a crime, don't expect a forensic team. This is the era of eyewitness justice. You might be asked to identify a garroter, a type of mugger who sneaks up behind victims and strangles them with a wire or cloth, while an accomplice empties their pockets. The garroting panic of the 1860s was so intense that gentlemen began wearing anti-garroter collars fitted with steel spikes. It's a terrifying thought. The very clothes that were poisoning you with arsenic were now being reinforced with iron to keep your throat from being crushed. You instinctively touch your own collar, feeling the vulnerability of your position in this unlit maze. The Rookery isn't just a place of crime, it's a masterpiece of architectural evasion. The buildings are so packed together that a thief can travel across 3 blocks without ever touching the ground, leaping from roof to roof or moving through ratless cut into the walls. There is a scholarly debate over whether the slum clearances of the late 19th century were motivated by a desire for better housing or a strategic military need to open up these rebel districts to police surveillance. As you watch the peeler disappear into the fog, you realize the city is a giant chessboard where the pieces are always in motion, and the bobbies are just trying to keep the board from being flipped over. You pass a gin palace on the edge of the slum. Its bright etched glass a stark contrast to the misery outside. Inside, you might find the swell mob, criminals who dress like gentlemen to blend into high society crowds at the races or the theatre. They are the aristocrats of the underworld, and they look down on the area sneaks, petty thieves with the same disdain a duke might have for a chimney sweep. It's a reminder that even in the shadows, the Victorian obsession with rank and hierarchy remains perfectly intact. You've learned that a silk hat doesn't always mean a clean heart, but it usually means a lighter touch. As the night deepens, the crushers see another slang term for the police start to double up. The Rookery is no place for a lone officer after midnight. You hear the distant, haunting sound of a police whistle, a signal that the beat has been compromised. It's a chilling sound that cuts through the fog, a reminder that order in London is a fragile, hard-won thing. You find yourself walking faster, your hand over your watch pocket, heading back toward the main thoroughfares where the gas lamps are more frequent. You've survived the mud, the medicine, the mills, and now the maze of the criminal underbelly. You've seen how the law works, or doesn't, in the places where the empire's polish has worn thin. But even a survivor of the Rookeries needs a touch of glamour to keep the spirits up. Tomorrow, we are leaving the dark alleys behind and heading for the glittering lights of Mayfair. We are going to attend a high society ball where the danger isn't a garroter's wire, but a misplaced word or a social slight that could end your reputation forever. Straighten your tie and try to forget the smell of the St. Giles basement. You're going to need your best drawing room face. The stench of the St. Giles Rookery still seems to cling to your skin, but you have no time to dwell on the darkness of the slums. Tonight, you are being catapulted to the opposite end of the Victorian spectrum. You have been invited to a high society ball in Mayfair, the glittering, marble-floored apex of the British Empire. This is the season, a whirlwind of parties and social manoeuvring, where marriages are brokered like treaty negotiations and reputations can be dismantled by a single raised eyebrow. Honestly, you probably won't survive the sheer exhaustion of the cotillion, let alone the judgmental stares of the dowagers lining the walls. You are trading your mud-stained boots for patent leather and your anonymity for a spotlight of 1,000 wax candles. As you step out of your carriage, you are greeted by an army of footmen in powdered wigs and silk breeches. The transition is jarring. Just miles away, people are fighting for 4-penny coffins. But here the cost of the floral arrangements alone could feed a parish for a year. The air inside the mansion is heavy with the scent of hothouse lilies and expensive French perfume, a far cry from the London particular fog outside. Historians still argue whether these balls were a vital marriage market that ensured the stability of the ruling class, or an unsustainable display of decadence that fueled the fires of social unrest. To you, it feels like a dream scripted by a very expensive decorator. You are introduced to the ballroom, and the sight is breathtaking. The walls are lined with mirrors that double the light of the massive crystal chandeliers. This is the era of conspicuous consumption. A quirky fringe tidbit of these high society events is the dance card, a small, ivory-bound booklet attached to a lady's wrist by a silk cord. A gentleman must request a specific dance, a waltz, a quadrille, or a polka, and if he's lucky, she will write his name in her card. If you try to ask for a third dance with the same woman, you are practically announcing an engagement. Any more than that, and you might as well start looking for a ring. You might recall that crocodile dung sunscreen we discussed here. The sunscreen is a layer of rigid etiquette that prevents any genuine emotion from leaking through the silk and lace. The waltz is the scandal of the age. Although it's 18s, older guests still remember when the waltz was considered riotous and indecent because it allowed a man to place his hand around a lady's waist. You find yourself spinning across the floor, the world a blur of colorful silk and sparkling diamonds. But beneath the glamour, there is a physical toll. The ladies are wearing corsets laced so tightly they can barely expand their lungs, and the heat from the hundreds of gas jets and wax candles can easily reach 90 degrees Fahrenheit. Fainting is so common that retiring rooms are equipped with smelling salts and sofas as a standard feature. You aren't just dancing, you're performing a high cardio routine in a vacuum-sealed suit. Mainstream historical facts often highlight the marriage act and the complex laws of inheritance, but the ball is where the real work happens. You overhear snippets of conversation, the price of consols, the latest news from the Indian Mutiny, and the scandalous flirtation of a young earl. You realize that everyone here is an actor. The season is a 3-month-long audition for a life of prestige. If you trip over your own feet or use the wrong fork at the midnight supper, you won't just be embarrassed, you'll be dropped from the invitation lists, a social death sentence that is nearly impossible to reverse. Speaking of the midnight supper, the food is a marvel of Victorian excess. You see towers of jellied eel, whole roasted boars, and Nestle-Road pudding. However, remember our talk about Victorian food. Even here, the dangers lurk. The bright colours of the jellies are often achieved with the same toxic dyes we found in the slums, and the ice cream is made with ice harvested from polluted rivers and stored in sawdust-filled pits. You take a sip of champagne, hoping the bubbles are real and not just a chemical reaction in a Fox vintage bottle. It's a world of beautiful surfaces, but the foundations are often just as shaky as a tenement in Spitalfields. As the clock strikes 3, the energy begins to flag, but the etiquette does not. You must pay your respects to the hostess before you can even think of leaving. You see the wallflowers, young women who haven't been asked to dance, trying to look occupied as they sit under the watchful eyes of their chaperones. The social pressure is immense. Every movement is being calculated by the ton, the elite circle that dictates what is on and what is out. You realize that the freedom you felt in the rowdy music hall was a luxury these people will never know. Here, every smile is a tactical decision. You finally make your exit, stepping back out into the cool, damp air of the Mayfair night. Your patent leather shoes are pinching, your stiff collar is wilting, and your head is spinning from the champagne and the social mirth. You've survived the mud, the medicine, the mills, and now the highest peaks of society. You have proven that you can move through any world, from the gutter to the gala. But as the sun begins to hint at the horizon, you realize that for all their wealth, the Victorians are a deeply haunted people. Tomorrow, we are going to explore why they are so obsessed with the other side. We are going into the shadows of a candlelit parlour to attend a séance. We'll see why a society built on hard science and industrial iron was so desperate to talk to ghosts. Put away your dance card and find a dark shawl. The spirits are waiting, and they have a lot to say about the world you've been navigating. The glittering lights of the Mayfair ball fade into the flicker of a single guttering candle. You've moved from the physical exhaustion of the waltz to the psychological tension of the Victorian parlour. Despite their mastery of steam and steel, the Victorians are a people haunted by the sheer scale of their own progress and the staggering mortality rates of their cities. In the 1860s and 70s, spiritualism has become a cultural phenomenon, a bridge between the cold hard facts of science and the desperate human need for reassurance. You are about to attend a séance, and honestly, you probably won't survive the spectral encounter without a healthy dose of skepticism. You are sitting around a heavy mahogany table, knees touching those of strangers, waiting for the knocks from the other side. You are in the home of a middle-class family in Bloomsbury. The heavy velvet curtains are drawn tight, shutting out the soot and the street cries of London. The air is thick with the scent of lavender and old books. At the head of the table sits the medium, often a young woman who appears to be in a deep, agonizing trance. Historians still argue whether the rise of spiritualism was a genuine collective grief, response to the high death toll of the era, or a sophisticated form of theatrical entertainment that exploited the vulnerable. To you, as the medium's breathing becomes ragged and shallow, it feels like the room has suddenly dropped 10 degrees in temperature. Suddenly, the table begins to vibrate. A sharp tap-tap echoes from the floorboards. This is table turning, the most common form of Victorian spirit communication. A quirky and somewhat hilarious fringe tidbit is that even the great scientist Michael Faraday got involved, inventing a testing board to prove that the table turning was caused by audiomotor action, the participants' own muscles moving the table unconsciously due to expectation. But here, in the dark, science feels very far away. You might recall that crocodile dung sunscreen we talked about in this room. The sunscreen is a layer of desperate belief that protects the sitters from the harsh reality that their loved ones are truly gone. The séance intensifies. A spirit trumpet sitting on the table begins to float in the air, or so it seems in the dim light. You hear a faint, ethereal voice whispering names. The Victorians were obsessed with ectoplasm, a mysterious, gauzy substance that supposedly flowed from the medium's body during a session. In reality, it was often just cheesecloth or egg whites swallowed and regurgitated, but under the flickering gaslight, it looks terrifyingly supernatural. Mainstream historical facts tell us that famous figures like Sir Arthur Conan Doyle were true believers, while others, like Harry Houdini later on, made it their mission to debunk the tricks. You watch a spirit hand emerge from the shadows, white and translucent. Is it a ghost? Or is it the medium's foot slipped out of her shoe? Conversation afterward is hushed and intense. People discuss the Summerland, the spiritualist version of heaven, which sounded remarkably like a very clean, very quiet English suburb. This was the era of post-mortem photography, as well, where families would pose for a portrait with a recently deceased relative, propped up to look as if they were merely sleeping. Death was everywhere in the 19th century, in the water, the air, and the fabric of your clothes. So it's no wonder the Victorians wanted to domesticate it. You realize that the séance isn't just about ghosts. It's about a society trying to find a soul in the middle of an industrial machine. However, be careful who you trust. The professional medium trade is full of confidants who scan the obituary columns of the Times to gather personal details about their clients before the session begins. If you're caught investigating. Too closely, trying to grab the spirit hand or shining a hidden lantern, you'll be thrown out for disturbing the vibrations. It's a closed system of faith. You find yourself wondering if the spirit you just heard was actually your late great aunt or just a clever use of a hidden telegraph key hidden in the medium's sleeve. The social aspect of the seance is fascinating. It's one of the few places where women, as mediums, are granted absolute authority over a room full of men. In a trance, a woman can say things about politics, religion, or family secrets that would be scandalous in a drawing room. It's a safe way to subvert the rigid etiquette we practiced in Mayfair. You see a normally stoic businessman weeping as the medium tells him his daughter is happy in the light. It is a raw, emotional vulnerability that the Victorian world usually works so hard to suppress. As the session ends and the lamps are turned back up, the room feels smaller, shabbier. The spirit has retreated, leaving behind only the smell of burnt wax and the sound of a distant steam whistle. You step back out into the London night, and for the first time, the fog doesn't just look like coal smoke, it looks like a veil. You've survived the mud, the medicine, the mills, and the spirits. You've seen the Victorians at their most rational and their most irrational. Tomorrow, we are going to leave the world of shadows for a world of blinding speed. We are going to board a steam elephant, the railway, and travel across the countryside at the terrifying speed of 30 miles per hour. We'll see how the iron horse changed the human perception of time and space forever, and why people thought their brains might literally melt from the velocity. Brace yourself. The Victorian world is about to move faster than you ever thought possible. The silence of the seance is shattered by the shrill, piercing scream of a whistle. You are standing on the platform of Euston Station, and the air is no longer still. It is pulsing with the raw, rhythmic power of the iron horse. In the 1840s and 50s, the railway wasn't just a way to get from A to B, it was a psychological revolution. For thousands of years, the fastest a human could travel was the speed of a galloping horse. Suddenly, you are being invited to hurtle through space at 30, 40, even 50 miles per hour. Honestly, you probably won't survive the railway spine, or the sheer sensory overload of the journey. To many Victorians, the train was a metallic monster that was literally tearing the fabric of time and space. You step into a first-class carriage, which looks like a posh drawing room that has been shrunken and bolted to a chassis. The seats are plush velvet and the wood is polished mahogany. However, if you were a third-class passenger, you'd be sitting in what is essentially an open, topped cattle truck, exposed to the wind, the rain, and the red-hot cinders flying off the locomotive. This is the era of railway mania. Historians still argue whether the rail network was the primary catalyst for the British economic miracle or a speculative bubble that ruined as many lives as it enriched. For you, the concern is more immediate. You've heard that the human brain isn't designed to process scenery moving at such violent speeds. As the train jerks into motion, you feel a surge of adrenaline. The city begins to peel away. The tenements, the smokestacks, the church spires becoming a grey blur. A quirky and genuinely panicked fringe tidbit of early rail travel was the fear of railway madness. Some doctors believed that the rapid flickering of the landscape past the windows would cause the brain to overheat or lead to a total mental breakdown. There were reports of passengers suddenly becoming violent or delusional simply because they couldn't handle the velocity. You might recall that crocodile dung sunscreen from our earlier chats here. The sunscreen is a heavy silk curtain you pull across the window to keep the terrifyingly fast world at bay. The noise is a constant, grinding roar of iron on iron. Because the carriages are not yet connected by corridors, you are locked in your compartment with your fellow travellers until the next station. This created a new kind of social anxiety. The railway murder. If you found yourself trapped with a lunatic or a thief, There was no escape and no way to signal for help. It's a mainstream historical fact that the first murder on a British train in 1864, the killing of Thomas Briggs, sent the nation into a moral panic, leading to the installation of communication cords and small peepholes between compartments. You find yourself eyeing the gentleman sitting opposite you, wondering if his leather Gladstone bag contains a change of clothes or a blunt instrument. The train is also the great standardizer. Before the railway, every town in England kept its own time based on the local position of the sun. When it was noon in London, it might be 2015 in Bristol, but trains require a schedule. This led to the creation of railway time, where the entire country was forced to synchronize to Greenwich Mean Time. You are no longer living by the rhythm of your village, you are living by the rhythm of the clock. This shift is what truly created the modern world, turning humans into time-keeping animals. You check your pocket watch, a hunter, case you've kept hidden from the pickpockets, and realize the train is precisely 3 minutes late. In the Victorian mind, this is a minor tragedy. As you look out the window now that your brain hasn't melted, you notice the railway cutting. The sheer engineering required to lay these tracks is staggering. Thousands of navvies, the rough, hard-drinking labourers who built the lines, moved millions of tons of earth by hand. They are the unsung heroes of the age, living in temporary shanty towns that were often more dangerous than the rookeries of London. There is a scholarly debate over whether the navvy subculture was a precursor to modern labour unions or simply a lawless byproduct of rapid industrial expansion. You see a group of them leaning on their shovels as the train thunders past, their faces caked in the same red clay as the embankments. The sensation of travel is changing your relationship with the land. The picturesque countryside is now just a background for your commute. You pass through a tunnel, and the carriage is plunged into a terrifying, coal-scented darkness. The oil lamp in the ceiling flickers, casting a sickly yellow glow. For a few minutes, you are in a sensory vacuum, the only sound the rhythmic clack, 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 clack of the wheels. It's a moment of strange, industrial intimacy. When you emerge back into the light, the fields of Hertfordshire have been replaced by the outskirts of a new town. The railway is a space eater, shrinking the world until everywhere feels like a suburb of London. You finally arrive at your destination, your ears ringing and your clothes smelling faintly of sulphur. You've survived the Iron Horse. You didn't go mad, you weren't murdered in your seat, and you've arrived 30 miles away in less time than it would take to walk across London. You are part of the new, mobile generation. But all this speed and soot has left you craving something the Victorians invented to soothe the industrial soul, the seaside holiday. Tomorrow, we are going to take this train all the way to the coast. We are going to experience the bracing air of Brighton, where we'll encounter the bathing machine, the donkey shingle, and the terrifying prospect of Victorian swimwear. Leave your heavy wool coat behind. You're going to need your saltwater constitution for what's coming next. The sulphurous soot of the railway carriage is still a gritty memory on your skin as you arrive at the terminus. The air here is different. It's sharp, salty, and carries the faint scent of rotting seaweed and fried fish. You have arrived in Brighton, the London by the sea. In the 1870s, the seaside holiday has transformed from a rare medical treatment for the elite into a boisterous, crowded ritual for the masses. The railway has made it possible for a shopkeeper to escape the smog for a weekend of bracing air. Honestly, you probably won't survive the freezing temperatures of the English Channel or the sheer awkwardness of Victorian beach etiquette. You are trading the great stink for the great soak, and the rules of the water are just as rigid as the rules of the ballroom. You walk onto the pebble beach, the stones crunching under your leather soles. The sight is a colourful chaos of striped umbrellas, donkey rides, and Punch and Judy shows. This is the era of the bathing machine. a small wooden hut on high wheels designed to preserve your modesty at all costs. You pay a few pence to enter one of these huts, where you change into your swimming costume. For a man, this is a woolly, one-piece striped suit that becomes incredibly heavy and itchy the moment it touches water. For a woman, it's a voluminous flannel dress and bloomers that weigh about 20 pounds when wet. Historians still argue whether these restrictive garments were more about Victorian morality or a subconscious fear of the liberating power of the ocean. Once changed, the horse-drawn bathing machine is backed into the surf until the water reaches the floorboards. You step out of the door, facing away from the beach, of course, and are greeted by a dipper. This is usually a formidable, muscular woman whose job is to grab you and plunge you bodily into the freezing waves. A quirky and rather harrowing fringe tidbit of the Victorian seaside was the belief that the shock of the cold water was the primary healing element. The more you gasped and struggled, the more good the water was doing for your constitution. You might recall that crocodile dung sunscreen we discussed here. The only thing protecting you from the elements is a layer of goosebumps and the sheer force of the dipper's grip. The seaside is a mainstream historical fact of Victorian social engineering. It was the first time the classes truly mixed in a leisure setting. Though mixing was a generous term, the beach was strictly partitioned, certain areas for gentlemen, others for ladies, and the most expensive stretches of sand for the quality. You see a gentleman observing the horizon through a telescope, though he seems suspiciously focused on the ladies' bathing area half a mile down the coast. This led to the rise of beach police and strict bylaws against indecent exposure, which in 1870 basically meant showing an ankle without a stocking. Conversation on the promenade is a relaxed version of the Mayfair chatter. You see people eating whelks and cockles from paper cones, a salty snack that replaced the gritty bread of the city. There is a sense of carnivalesque freedom here. You might even see a human curiosity or a freak show set up in a tent on the pier. The Victorians had a voyeuristic fascination with the other. Whether it was a woman with a 3-foot beard or a mermaid that was actually a monkey's torso sewn to a salmon's tail. It's a world where the boundary between science and showmanship is as blurry as the horizon line on a misty morning. However, the sea isn't all fun and donkeys. The bracing air was often a euphemism for a gale that could blow your top hat all the way to France. You notice the lifeboat house, a reminder that the Channel is a graveyard for many a Victorian vessel. There is a scholarly debate over whether the Victorian obsession with the seaside was a form of nature worship, to counteract the ugliness of the factories, or simply a new way for the burgeoning middle class to signal their wealth through leisure. As you sit on a rented folding chair, watching a toddler poke a jellyfish with a stick, you realize that the seaside is the Victorians' safety valve. It's where they go to breathe when the city becomes a chokehold. The health benefits were also highly specific. Doctors prescribed sea fuming, where you sat under the pier to inhale the spray, or even drinking small amounts of seawater to purge the bile. You decide to stick to the ginger beer and the salt air. As the sun begins to set over the West Pier, a masterpiece of cast iron and Gothic whimsy, the temperature drops rapidly. The Victorian seaside isn't about tropical warmth, it's about a rugged, shivering endurance. You head back to your boarding house, where the smell of boiled cabbage and damp wool reminds you that even on holiday, you are still in England. You've survived the mud, the medicine, the music halls, the mills, and now the bathing machines. You are seeing the leisure side of the empire, but don't get too comfortable in your deck chair. The year is 1851 and back in London. A miracle of glass and iron is being built to showcase everything you've seen and everything the world has to offer. Tomorrow, we are heading back to the city to visit the Great Exhibition. We are going to step inside the Crystal Palace, where 100 Thousand objects from every corner of the globe are waiting to dazzle you. Pack your Sunday best. We're going to witness the very peak of human achievement, and we're going to do it in a building that shouldn't be able to stand. The ocean was big, but the Crystal Palace is a world of its own. The salt spray of Brighton is still crusting on your skin as you board the train back to London. You aren't returning to the mud of the docks or the gloom of the Rookeries. You are heading toward Hyde Park to witness the eighth wonder of the world. It is 1851, and before you stands the Crystal Palace. Imagine a building made entirely of glass and iron, stretching nearly 2,000 feet long and tall enough to enclose the park's ancient elm trees within its shimmering walls. It looks like a giant frozen soap bubble. This is the great exhibition of the works of industry of all nations, the brainchild of Prince Albert. Honestly, you probably won't survive the sheer sensory overload of seeing 100,000 objects from every corner of the globe in a single afternoon. You are about to step into the very soul of the Victorian ego. You pay your shilling at the gate, part of the shilling days that allowed the working class to mingle with the elite. The air inside is surprisingly fresh, filtered by the massive volume of the space, and cooled by a giant crystal fountain that stands 27 feet tall in the center. Historians still argue whether the Great Exhibition was a genuine celebration of global peace or a calculated display of British industrial dominance intended to intimidate rival empires. For you, standing in the transept, it's simply the most beautiful thing you've ever seen. The sunlight pours through the glass roof, illuminating a forest of machinery, fine art, and colonial treasures. As you wander through the aisles, you see the mediocrity and the magnificent side by side. There is a massive block of coal weighing 24 tons, a testament to the fuel of the age, and just a few yards away, the Koh-i-Noor diamond, guarded by armed sentries. A quirky and slightly absurd fringe tidbit of the exhibition was the expanding piano for travel and the silent alarm bed that tilted to dump the sleeper onto the floor at a set time. The Victorians were obsessed with gadgetry for its own sake. You might recall that crocodile dung sunscreen from earlier here. You'll find an atmospheric umbrella and a self-acting rolling pin. It's a carnival of human ingenuity, some of it brilliant, some of it utterly useless. One of the most revolutionary aspects of the palace is something we take for granted today, the public waiting rooms. These were the first major public toilets, designed by George Jennings. For a penny, you got a clean seat, a towel, a comb, and a shoe shine. This is where the phrase, "to spend a penny," comes from. It's a mainstream historical fact that over 800,000 people paid for the privilege, proving that the Victorians were just as impressed by modern plumbing as they were by steam engines. You find yourself standing in line, realizing that even in a temple of glass, the physical needs of millions must be managed with industrial precision. The social atmosphere is electric. You see a duke in his garter ribbon standing next to a chimney sweep in his Sunday best. This was Prince Albert's dream, a great union of the classes. However, the hierarchy remains. The rich visit on the 5-shilling days to avoid the crowds, while the shilling folk marvel at the sheer scale of the wealth on display. You overhear a group of scholars in a heated debate. There is a persistent scholarly debate over whether the exhibition actually improved public taste or if it merely encouraged a cluttered aesthetic of over-ornamentation that would define the Victorian home for decades. Everywhere you look, there is more velvet, more brass, more carved oak, more of everything. You visit the medieval court, designed by Augustus Pugin, which feels like a dark, Gothic cathedral inside the bright glass shell. Then you step into the India section, where you are surrounded by silk, ivory, and a life-sized stuffed elephant draped in jewels. It is a visual representation of the empire's reach. You realize that the Crystal Palace is a map of the world, redrawn with London at the center. It's intoxicating and overwhelming. Your feet ache from the miles of galleries, and your eyes are tired from the glare of the glass. As you exit the palace and step back into the green grass of Hyde Park, the world feels a bit dimmer. You've seen the absolute peak of the 19th century vision. You've survived the mud, the mills and the seaside, and now you've seen the crown jewel of it all. But even in this palace of progress, there is a shadow. The beautiful glass was cleaned by men on high ladders with no safety nets, and the machines were built by the very half-timers we met in the north. Tomorrow, we are going to look at that shadow. We are going to follow the children who didn't get to go to the exhibition because they were stuck in the flues. We are going to explore childhood in the shadows, from the chimney sweeps to the street urchins, to see the human cost of all this glass and iron. Keep your memories of the Crystal Palace close. You're going to need that light for the dark places we're heading next. The shimmering reflections of the Crystal Palace are still dancing in your mind, but as you walk back toward the heart of the city, the light begins to fail. You are moving away from the age of progress and into the age of pity. To understand Victorian London, you have to look beneath the glass and iron, down into the soot-stained reality of those who never got to see the exhibition. You are entering the world of childhood in the shadows. In a society that romanticized the innocence of children in poetry, it simultaneously fueled its economy with their small, nimble hands. Honestly, you probably won't survive the physical toll of a day in the life of a climbing boy, but the fire in the master's hearth is waiting to be cleaned. You find yourself in a narrow alley in Marylebone, standing next to a master sweep and his apprentice, a boy named Tom who can't be more than 6 years old. Tom is thin, his skin a permanent, bruised grey from the coal dust that has settled into his pores. His job is to climb into the narrow, winding flues of the great houses, some of which are only 7 inches square. This is the era of the Chimney Sweepers Act, but in 1850 the law is widely ignored. Historians still argue whether the slow pace of child labour reform was due to economic necessity or a genuine lack of empathy from the ruling class. For Tom, the debate is irrelevant. He just needs to know if the flue is still hot. You watch as the boy strips off his tattered shirt and prepares to climb, to toughen his skin. His master has likely rubbed his elbows and knees with brine and held them close to a fire, a quirky and brutal fringe tidbit of the trade designed to prevent the raw bleeding that occurs during the climb. As he disappears into the black throat of the chimney, you hear the muffled scritch, scratch of his knees against the brick. He is a human brush. You might recall that crocodile dung sunscreen we talked about in the flue. The only sunscreen is a layer of soot that causes soot wart, a form of skin cancer that was the first ever recorded industrial disease. Tom is literally climbing into his own grave to ensure a wealthy family can enjoy a smoke-free parlour. Mainstream historical facts often highlight the work of Lord Shaftesbury and the Climbing Boys campaign, but the reality on the street is a persistent cycle of exploitation. If Tom gets stuck, the master might light a small fire beneath him to encourage him to move, or send another boy up to pull him down by his heels. It is a terrifying, claustrophobic existence. You see other shadow children as you walk. The crossing sweepers we met earlier, the Lucifer match, girls whose jaws are rotting from white phosphorus, a condition called possy-jawed, and the laundry boys, who carry heavy baskets through the freezing rain. These aren't just workers, they are the invisible scaffolding of the Victorian middle class. Conversation among these children is a dialect of survival. They don't talk about toys or school. They talk about the coppers they've earned and where to find the warmest grate to sleep near. You see a group of Arab children, a Victorian term for homeless street urchins, huddled together under a railway arch. They are the city sparrows, living on their wits and whatever they can scavenge or steal. There is a scholarly debate over whether the ragged schools provided a genuine escape from this life or merely served as a way to indoctrinate the poor into a life of low-level servitude. You watch a girl selling watercress, her feet bare on the icy cobbles, and you realize that childhood, as we know it, is a luxury she simply cannot afford. The Victorian obsession with moral reform often led to strange contradictions. People would weep over a sentimental novel like Oliver Twist, then walk past a real-life Oliver in the street without a glance. You see a blacking factory, much like the one Charles Dickens was forced to work in as a child, where boys spend 12 hours a day pasting labels on bottles of boot polish. The monotony is as soul-crushing as the physical labor. You realize that the Great Exhibition was built on the backs of these small, tired frames. Every piece of lace, every polished engine, and every brick in the Crystal Palace has the fingerprint of a child on it. However, change is starting to flicker. You pass a half-time school where children spend part of their day learning to read between shifts at the mill or the forge. It's a major start, but it's a recognition that a child is more than just a unit of labor. You see a boy practicing his letters in the dirt with a stick, a small act of defiance against a world that wants him to be a machine. The discipline of the slate we saw earlier feels like a privilege compared to the discipline of the flu. As the soot heavy fog of the evening rolls in, the shadow children retreat to their cellars and garrets. You've survived the mud, the medicine, the mills, and now the heartbreaking reality of the Victorian street child. You've seen the highest heights and the lowest depths. But even in the shadows, there is a connection to the wider world. The sugar in the children's meagre tea and the cotton in their rags came from across the ocean. Tomorrow, we are going to look at the empire on a plate. We are going to see how the spices of India and the teas of China transformed the Victorian kitchen. We'll see how a city built on soot and child labor became the warehouse of the world. Put away the image of the climbing boy for a moment. We're going to taste the riches that his labor helped pay for. The soot from the chimney flues still lingers in the air, but the scent is shifting. As you move toward the Great Dock of London, the smell of coal and misery is overtaken by a dizzying, aromatic tide. You are breathing in the empire. Here, the world's riches don't arrive in small packages, they arrive in mountains. In the 1870s, London is the world's pantry, a place where the exotic has become everyday. You are about to witness the empire on a plate, and honestly, you probably won't survive the sheer intensity of the spices or the hidden costs behind every spoonful of sugar. You are standing where the tea of China, the sugar of the West Indies, and the spices of India collide in a magnificent, chaotic buffet. You walk into a dockside warehouse, and the air is thick with a fine, sweet dust. This is the sugar floor. Massive hogsheads of raw, brown sugar are being hauled by straining laborers, their muscles glistening with sweat that mixes with the very product they carry. This is a mainstream historical fact. By the mid-19th century, the average Briton's sugar consumption had skyrocketed, transforming from a luxury for the rich into a vital energy source for the working class. Historians still argue whether this sugar revolution provided the necessary calories to fuel the Industrial Revolution, or if it simply created a public health crisis of tooth decay and malnutrition. For you, the sugar is a sticky, sweet haze that covers everything you touch. Next to the sugar are the tea chests, lined with lead and stamped with the marks of the East India Company. You watch a taster at work, slurping infusions of fine bohea or gunpowder green with a loud, practiced hiss. A quirky and rather fascinating fringe tidbit of the tea trade was the Victorian obsession with adulteration. In the colonies before the 1850s, some Chinese suppliers were known to use Prussian blue and gypsum to make green tea look more vibrant. For the British market, you're literally drinking a chemical dye to satisfy an aesthetic preference. You might recall that crocodile dung sunscreen we discussed It seems the Victorians were just as willing to ingest strange substances as the ancients were to smear them on their faces, provided the packaging was respectable. The Victorian kitchen is a laboratory of global flavours. You see, mulligatawny, soup on a tavern menu, a British attempt to recreate the spicy pepper water of South India. It's thick, yellow with turmeric, and pungent with cumin. This is the era where curry powder became a staple in the English cupboard, sold in glass jars to housewives who had never seen a ginger root in their lives. You are seeing the birth of fusion food. The British didn't just conquer the world, they ate it. They took the spices of the East and mellowed them with the flour and suet of the North, creating a culinary identity that was as expansive as their maps. However, the empire on a plate has a dark side. As you watch a servant grind pepper, you realize that the global supply chain is a fragile, often brutal thing. The Great Famine in Ireland and the various colonial famines in India occurred while food was being exported to the heart of the empire. There is a scholarly debate over whether the Victorian commitment to free trade was a noble economic principle or a convenient excuse to ignore the suffering of the producers. You take a bite of a plum pudding, rich with soot and dried raisins from the Mediterranean, and you can't help but think about the labour that brought each ingredient to your tongue. The world is getting smaller, but the distance between the diner and the worker has never been greater. The social ritual of the dinner party is where these ingredients are truly weaponized. To serve a pineapple, a fruit that was still incredibly difficult to transport, was a sign of immense wealth. You see a hostess proudly displaying one as a centerpiece, not to be eaten, but merely to be admired for its exotic status. The dinner table is a stage where the empire is performed. You use a silver salt cellar for salt from the mines of Cheshire, a pepper grinder for peppercorns from Malabar, and a silver fork for meat that may have come from the plains of Argentina, preserved in the new-fangled refrigerated ice ships. You are eating the geography of the planet. As the sun sets over the masts of the tall ships in the Pool of London, the city feels like a giant, pulsing stomach. The cries of London we heard at breakfast have been replaced by the heavy, rhythmic thud of the cranes. You've survived the mud, the medicine, the music halls, and the mills, and now you've tasted the riches of the world. You are a well-fed citizen of the 19th century. But even with a stomach full of curry and tea, the Victorian heart remains a strange and often dark place. Tomorrow we are going to look at how the Victorians celebrated the most magical time of the year. We are going into the world of the Victorian Christmas. We'll see the origins of the Christmas card, the tree, and the bizarre, often creepy traditions that make our modern holidays look positively normal. Bring a glass of mulled wine, the kind with plenty of those colonial cloves, and prepare for a holiday that is as beautiful as it is unsettling. The aromatic spices of the docks have followed you home, but as December descends upon London, the air turns crisp and the soot-stained windows begin to frost over. You are about to experience the Old English Christmas, a holiday that was essentially reinvented before your very eyes in the 1840s and 50s. While you might expect a cozy Dickensian scene of carols and warmth, the Victorian holiday season has a surprisingly dark and surreal edge. Honestly, you probably won't survive the Snapdragon game or the sheer creepiness of the early greeting cards. You are stepping into a world where the joyous celebration of birth is balanced by a strange, lingering obsession with the macabre. You walk past a shop window and see the very first Christmas cards, a tradition started by Sir Henry Cole in 1843. But these aren't the snowy landscapes or jolly Santas you know. Instead, you see a card depicting a dead robin lying on its back with its feet in the air, or a troop of anthropomorphic frogs stabbing each other with forks. A quirky and genuinely baffling fringe tidbit of the Victorian Christmas was the popularity of these morbid cards. To the Victorian mind, the image of a dead bird was a symbol of good luck and a reminder to be charitable to the poor during the harsh winter. You might recall that crocodile dung sunscreen from earlier. Here, the sunscreen is a layer of bizarre symbolism that makes a dead robin feel festive. In the parlour, the centre of attention is the Christmas tree. While it had existed in small pockets of England before, it was the 1848 illustration of Queen Victoria and Prince Albert gathered around a decorated fir at Windsor Castle that turned it into a national obsession. You see the branches dripping with wax candles, gingerbread stars, and cornucopias, filled with those colonial sweets we just tasted. Historians still argue whether the Victorian Christmas was a genuine revival of medieval folk traditions or a manufactured commercial event designed to sell the new mass-produced goods of the Industrial Revolution. To you, it feels like a beautiful, if somewhat flammable, miracle in the middle of a dark winter. The food is a marathon of soot and spice. You are presented with a Christmas pudding which has been aging in a basin for weeks. It is doused in brandy and set alight, a blue flame dancing over the dark, fruity mound. This leads into the most dangerous game of the night, Snap-Dragon. A large, shallow bowl is filled with brandy and raisins, then set on fire. The goal is to reach into the flames and snatch a raisin out without burning your fingers. It's a mainstream historical fact that this was a standard family activity, often played in a darkened room to make the blue flames look more demonic. You watch as a child narrowly avoids singeing his eyebrows, laughing while he pops a flaming raisin into his mouth. It's a reminder that even in their joy, the Victorians had a rugged relationship with physical pain. Conversation turns to ghost stories as the fire in the hearth roars. In the 19th century, Christmas was the traditional time for winter tales of the supernatural. Hence why Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol is a ghost story first and a holiday story second. People gather close, the shadows lengthening on the walls, to hear about the Mistletoe Boff, a popular and terrifying legend about a young bride who hides in an oak chest during a game of hide and seek on her wedding night, only to be trapped and found as a skeleton years later. There is a scholarly debate over why the Victorians felt the need to mix the merry with the scary. Perhaps when death is a constant neighbour in the city, inviting it to the party makes it feel a little less threatening. You might also encounter the mummers, performers in strange, straw-covered costumes who go from house to house performing folk plays about St. George and the Dragon. It's a chaotic, noisy tradition that feels more like a pagan ritual than a Christian holiday. You give them a few coppers to keep them from blessing your doorstep with too much noise. The Victorian Christmas is a tapestry of the old world and the new, a frantic attempt to create hearth and home in a society that was being rapidly uprooted by the railway and the mill. As the night winds down, you find yourself under a sprig of mistletoe. In the 19th century, this was a serious social contract. For every kiss taken, a berry had to be plucked from the branch. Once the berries were gone, the privilege of the kiss ended. It's a perfect metaphor for the Victorian era, a moment of passion strictly governed by a numerical limit. You've survived the mud, the medicine, the mills, and now the flaming raisins of a Victorian Christmas. You are seeing the warmth that kept the engine of the empire running through the long, soot-heavy winters. But the new year is coming, and with it, a wave of gadgets and inventions that will make the Snap-Dragon look like a caveman's toy. Tomorrow, we are going to explore the cutting edge of the 19th century. We are going to test out the Victorian innovations. From the clicking telegraph that shrunk the world to the velocipede that promised to turn every man into a high-speed machine. Wash the brandy off your hands. The future is arriving by telegram, and it's moving faster than a flaming raisin. The blue flames of the Snap-Dragon have flickered out, and the holiday greenery has been taken down to be burned, but the air is still buzzing with a new kind of energy. You have entered the era of the patent age, a time when the Victorian obsession with progress has moved from the massive steam engine to the personal gadget. The world is shrinking, and for the first time in human history, information is moving faster than a horse can gallop. You are about to test out the newest Victorian innovations, and honestly, you probably won't survive the electrical shocks or the spectacular crashes that come with being an early adopter. You are trading your quill for a telegraph key and your walking stick for a pair of iron wheels. You stand in a small, cluttered office in the city of London, watching a brass needle flicker back and forth on a mahogany base. This is the electric telegraph. For the first time, a merchant in London can know the price of tea in Canton or the movement of a ship in New York within minutes rather than months. Historians still argue whether the telegraph was the Victorian internet, creating a global village of instant communication, or a tool of imperial surveillance that allowed the government to crush distant rebellions with chilling efficiency. You watch the clatter-clack of the machine and realize that the concept of waiting is dying. A quirky fringe tidbit of the telegraph era was the lovesick operator. Stories of telegraphers in different cities who would chat over the wires during quiet hours, eventually falling in love and marrying without ever having met in person. Outside, the streets are filled with a new mechanical terror, the velocipede, or bond shaker. This is the ancestor of the modern bicycle, made of solid iron and wood with no rubber tires. You climb onto the saddle and realize why it earned its nickname. Every cobblestone in London sends a shudder through your spine that threatens to rattle your teeth out of your head. There are no brakes, and the pedals are attached directly to the front wheel. It is a mainstream historical fact that bicycle schools opened up across the city to teach people how to ride these contraptions without breaking their limbs or their dignity. You might recall that crocodile dung sunscreen we discussed on a bond shaker. You'd give anything for a layer of padding against the iron seat. The innovation doesn't stop at transport. You visit a photographic studio where a man is adjusting a massive mahogany camera to have your portrait taken. You must sit perfectly still for nearly 30 seconds while your head is held in a hidden iron clamp to prevent blurring. The result is the daguerreotype, a shimmering silver-coated plate that captures your likeness with haunting clarity. There is a scholarly debate over whether photography killed the art of portrait painting or simply democratized the human image, allowing the working class to leave a visual record of their existence for the first time. You look at your own image on the plate, stiff, unblinking, and slightly terrified, and realize you have achieved a form of immortality. In the home, the sewing machine is the ultimate status symbol. What once took a housewife 14 hours to stitch by hand can now be done in 90 minutes. But this efficiency has a cost. The Singer machine, with its rhythmic treadle action, turns the domestic parlor into a mini factory. You see a woman working by the light of a paraffin lamp, a new invention that provides a steady, bright flame without the smell of whale oil or the flickering of candles. It feels like the night is being conquered. However, paraffin is highly flammable. One tip of the lamp and the flammable crinolines we discussed earlier turn a cozy evening into a tragedy. The Victorian era is a period of high reward, high risk living. You might even see a pneumatic dispatch tube being installed in a government office, a system that uses air pressure to suck canisters of mail through underground pipes at 30 miles per hour. The Victorians believed that everything could be solved with a pipe and a pump. From the talking machine, say an early phonograph, to the typewriter, the 1870s and 80s are a frantic race toward the future. You find yourself dizzy with the options. Should you send a postal card, a new invention that allows you to send a short message for just a halfpenny? Or should you invest in a stereoscope, which uses two slightly different images to create a 3D view of the Great Pyramids in your own living room? As the gas lamps flicker in the dusk, now augmented by the first experimental electric arc Lights in some districts, the city feels like it's vibrating. You've survived the mud, the medicine, the music halls, the mills, and now the mechanical gadgets of the future. You are a modern Victorian, connected by wires and wheels to a world that is spinning faster every day. But as the information age begins to dawn, the older generation is still clinging to the ancient rituals of the past. Tomorrow, we are going to look at the Victorian obsession with the final journey. We are going into the world of mourning and the Magnificent Seven. We'll see the elaborate rituals of death, the black plumed horses, and the sprawling garden cemeteries that were built when the city's churchyards literally began to overflow. Put away your telegraph key. We're going to need a black armband for what's coming next. The high-speed hum of the telegraph and the rattle of the bond shaker fade into a heavy, respectful silence. You have moved from the frantic birth of the future to the Victorian obsession with the finality of the past. In the mid to late 19th century, death is not a private family matter, it is a public theatrical and highly regulated industry. With mortality rates still stubbornly high, the Victorians have turned mourning into a fine art, a complex language of fabric and etiquette that dictates your life for years after a loved one has departed. Honestly, you probably won't survive the social bankruptcy of a shabby funeral, nor the sheer atmospheric weight of a city that has quite literally run out of room for its dead. You are standing on a street corner in Highgate, watching a funeral procession pass. It is a sea of deepest black. The hearse is a masterpiece of carved ebony, pulled by four black, as night, Dutch horses adorned with towering plumes of ostrich feathers. Behind it walk the mutes, professional mourners hired to look incredibly sad and stand silently at the door of the deceased's house. Historians still argue whether these elaborate rituals were a healthy way for a traumatized society to process grief or a predatory industry that forced the poor to spend a year's wages on a single afternoon of respectability. You watch a widow pass, her face hidden behind a veil of crepe, a scratchy silk and gum fabric that is notoriously bad for the skin. This is the era of the Magnificent Seven, the massive private cemeteries built on the outskirts of London to solve the crisis of the overflowing city churchyards. You visit Highgate Cemetery, a labyrinth of Egyptian-style tombs and Gothic cathedrals of the dead. It is a mainstream historical fact that before these cemeteries were built, the stench from urban burial grounds was so putrid it was thought to contribute to the miasma we've been fighting since Section 6. Here, death is sanitized into a garden. A quirky and slightly morbid fringe tidbit of the time is the safety coffin, fitted with a bell and a breathing tube, just in case you were buried during a particularly deep, mercurial sleep. You might recall that crocodile dung sunscreen from the ancients. Here, the sunscreen is a heavy granite headstone designed to keep the world out and the occupant firmly in. The rules of mourning are a logistical nightmare. If you are a widow, you must wear full mourning, all black crepe, no jewelry, for exactly 1 year and 1 day. Only then can you move to slight mourning, introducing shades of lavender, grey or mauve. If you wear a purple ribbon a day too early, you are a social pariah. A day too late, and you are seen as performatively miserable. Even your stationery must have a black border, the width of which signifies the closeness of the deceased. It is a scholarly debate whether this rigid system provided a helpful shield for the grieving, allowing them to withdraw from society, or if it was a patriarchal cage that kept women in a state of perpetual, useful sorrow. You visit a jeweler on Bond Street, but you aren't looking for diamonds. You are looking at jet, a fossilized coal from Whitby that became the only acceptable jewelry for mourning after Queen Victoria's husband, Albert, died. But the truly intimate pieces are made of hair. You see lockets containing intricate scenes, weeping willows or gravestones, woven entirely from the hair of the dead. It is a tactile, lingering connection to the physical body. You realize that the Victorians didn't want to move on. They wanted to carry their ghosts with them, pinned to their lapels and hanging from their watch chains. However, death in London is also a matter of class. While the rich rest in Highgate, the poor are still buried in common graves, deep pits where coffins are stacked 20 high, covered with only a thin layer of earth until the pit is full. You pass a burial club meeting in a pub where labourers pay a penny a week just to ensure they won't be buried by the parish in a plain deal box. The fear of a pauper's funeral is perhaps the greatest fear of the Victorian working class. To die without dignity is to admit that your life in the machine was worth nothing at all. As the sun sets behind the stone angels and ivy-covered crosses of the cemetery, the atmosphere is strangely peaceful. The Victorians turned the graveyard into a park, a place for Sunday strolls and quiet reflection. You've survived the mud, the medicine, the music halls, the mills, and now the monumental rituals of the grave. You are becoming a veteran of the long 19th century, a person who understands that in this world, life is short, but the memory, and the black crepe, is very, very long. But life continues outside the cemetery gates. The city is still growing, still hungry, and still changing. Tomorrow, we are going to leave the Soot and the headstones behind to see the other side of the English landscape. We are going into the country, exploring the contrast between the desperate rural poverty of the village and the sprawling, hidden power of the country estate. We'll see how the Downton life actually looked from the servants' hall. Dust off your boots, we're heading for the green fields, where the air is cleaner but the secrets are just as deep. The heavy, sombre gates of the Highgate Cemetery creak shut behind you, and the rhythmic clip-clop of mourning horses is replaced by the whistle of a steam engine, pulling you away from the urban sprawl. You are heading into the deep green heart of the English countryside. To the Romantic poets, this was a pastoral heaven, but to the Victorian survivor, the rural landscape is a study in brutal contrasts. On one side of the hill sits the great estate, a limestone palace with 100 rooms and a small army of servants. On the other, the labourer's cottage, where a family of 8 shares a space smaller than a Mayfair walk-in closet. Honestly, you probably won't survive the 400 a.m. wake-up call of the scullery maid, nor the damp rot of a thatched roof. You are about to see how the other half of England lives when they aren't crowded into a city slum. You arrive at a grand country house, a sprawling monument to old money and new titles. This is the era of the upstairs-downstairs divide. To keep this machine running, there is a rigid hierarchy of service. At the top is the house steward, at the bottom is the tweenie, or scullery maid, who spends her entire day in a windowless room scouring grease from copper pans with sand and lye. Historians still argue whether the Victorian domestic service system was a vital source of employment that provided civilizing training for the poor, or a form of social entrapment that stripped individuals of their identity and freedom. For you, the concern is the green baize door, the soundproof barrier that separates the glittering world of the drawing room from the frantic, sweaty reality of the kitchen. Walking through the servants' quarters, you notice the bells. Every room in the house is connected by wires to a board in the basement hallway. When a guest upstairs pulls a silk cord, a brass bell downstairs jingles, and a servant must drop everything to see if a gentleman wants his tea warmed or a fire poked. A quirky and rather exhausting fringe tidbit of the country estate was the footman's height requirement. Many great houses refused to hire anyone under 6 feet tall, and if they had 2 footmen, they had to be matched in height like a pair of carriage horses. You might recall that crocodile dung sunscreen we discussed in the servants' hall. Your sunscreen is a mask of perfect invisible neutrality. To be a good servant is to be seen and not heard, a ghost in a tuxedo. But step outside the estate walls and the pastoral dream turns grey. You visit a nearby village where the agricultural depression of the late 19th century has hit hard. While the city has the smog, the country has the damp. Labourers live in cottages with dirt floors and cob walls made of mud and straw. Mainstream historical facts point to the Enclosure Acts as the final blow to the English peasantry, forcing them off common land and making them entirely dependent on the whims of the local squire. You see a family sitting down to a meal of bread and scrape, bread with a microscopic layer of lard, and realize that the empire on a plate we tasted in London hasn't made it to the fields where the wheat is actually grown. There is a scholarly debate over whether the rural poor were actually healthier than the urban poor. While they had fresh air, they lacked the proximity to charities and the penny-cheap goods of the city markets. You see children working as bird scarers, standing in a frozen field for 12 hours with a wooden clacker to keep the crows off the seeds. It's a lonely, soul-crushing labour that makes the Hoff-timers in the mills look like they have a social life. You realise that the country estate is an island of impossible luxury surrounded by a sea of quiet, rural desperation. As evening falls, the squire's carriage rattles past, splashing mud on the labourers' boots. The social distance is measured in more than just miles. You've survived the mud, the medicine, the music halls, the mills, and now the rural divide. You've seen how the wealth of the world is funneled into these grand houses, and how little of it leaks out to the men and women who till the soil. You are witnessing the sunset of the traditional landed gentry, even if they don't know it yet. The world is changing. The sons of the labourers are heading to the city, and the daughters are looking toward the new department stores for a life beyond the scullery. But before the 19th century can finally close its eyes, there is one last grand performance to witness. Tomorrow, we are heading back to the heart of the empire for the final time. We are going to witness the Diamond Jubilee of Queen Victoria. We'll see a city draped in gold and red, a celebration of 60 years of progress and the bittersweet dawn of a new century. Put on your best clothes, the ones without the arsenic, if you can manage it, because the Queen is coming, and the world will never look like this again. The quiet, damp fields of the countryside fall behind as you are pulled back into the gravitational centre of the world. It is 1887 and London is no longer the city of 1850. The London particular fog still clings to the brickwork, but the shadows are now chased by the steady, humorless glow of electric streetlights. You have survived 5 decades of industrial upheaval, chemical bread, and the razor edge of social etiquette. Now, you are standing among a crowd of millions for the Diamond Jubilee of Queen Victoria. She has been on the throne for 60 years, a living bridge between the age of the horse and the age of the X-ray. Honestly, you probably won't survive the sheer crush of the crowd, but you wouldn't want to be anywhere else. You are witnessing the grand finale of the Victorian era. The city is draped in a riot of scarlet, gold and royal blue. Triumphal arches have been erected across the Strand, and the air is thick with the smell of celebratory gunpowder and roasting meat. This is the Festival of Empire. Historians still argue whether the Jubilee was the peak of British self-confidence or a frantic, over-the-top performance to hide the growing anxieties of a nation being overtaken by rising powers like Germany and America. To you, watching the colonial troops from Canada, India, and Australia march by in their glittering uniforms, it feels like the entire planet has converged on this single patch of grey pavement. The Queen herself passes in an open carriage, a small, sombre figure dressed in her perpetual mourning black, yet surrounded by the most spectacular display of military might the world has ever seen. A quirky fringe tidbit of the day was the Jubilee commemoration craze. You could buy anything from a Jubilee corset to a commemorative tin of cocoa featuring the Queen's stern profile. The Victorian obsession with souvenirs has reached its logical conclusion. You might recall that crocodile dung sunscreen from our first night together. By now, you've likely upgraded to a Jubilee parasol, though the London sun is still a rare guest. Mainstream historical facts highlight that by this year, The British Empire covered a quarter of the globe and governed nearly 400 million people. But as you stand in the crowd, you notice the subtle shifts. There are new women. On bicycles, their skirts slightly shorter and their gazes more direct. There are socialist pamphlets being handed out on the street corners, calling for an 8-hour day and an end to the very class system you've spent weeks navigating. The Iron Horse has been joined by the first experimental horseless carriages, coughing blue smoke and scaring the carriage horses. The future isn't arriving by telegram anymore, it's arriving by the second. As the evening celebrations begin, the sky is illuminated by a display of electric fireworks and searchlights from the Royal Navy ships anchored in the Thames. The river, once the Great Stink, is now the stage for a technological light show. There is a scholarly debate over whether the fin de siècle, the end of the century, was a time of hope or a time of decadence and fear. You find yourself caught between the two. You've seen the horrors of the chimney flues and the beauty of the Crystal Palace. You've survived the leeches of the old doctors and the bon shaker bicycles of the new engineers. You are a true Victorian, but the world you've mastered is already starting to dissolve. The bells of St. Paul's ring out, the same deep bronze tolling you heard on your first night in the fog. But the sound feels different now, less like a heartbeat and more like a curtain call. You've navigated the mud, the medicine, the music halls, the mills, the mandates of the classroom, the mysteries of the seance, and the magnificent rituals of death. You've walked the halls of Mayfair and the muck of the Thames. You aren't just a visitor anymore, you are a witness to the most transformative century in human history. The noise of the Jubilee begins to soften now, like a distant parade moving into a neighbouring street. The shouting of the crowds, the clatter of the horses, and the rhythmic thrum of the factory looms all begin to fade into a gentle rhythmic hum. Imagine the heavy velvet curtains of a Victorian parlour being drawn shut, one by one, sealing out the damp London night and the soot-stained sky. You are no longer on the slick cobblestones, you are tucked safely away from the London particular, wrapped in a warmth that no coal fire could provide. The world of 1897 is slowly dimming, the gas lamps flickering low before they are finally extinguished. The sharp edges of the iron machinery are softening in the twilight of your memory. Feel the weight of the day, the miles walked through the Rookeries, and the long dances in Mayfair. Settle into a deep, comfortable heaviness in your limbs. The empire is at rest, its vast, complicated machinery cooling in the stillness of the night. The horses are in their stables, the telegrams have all been sent, and even the Queen has closed her eyes at Windsor. You have navigated the labyrinth, and you have come out the other side. There are no more crossing sweepers to find, no more etiquette rules to remember, and no more mudlarking to be done. The air is clear and cool, smelling only of starlight and silence. Let your breathing slow to the pace of a sleeping city, steady and calm. The 19th century is a story told, a journey completed. You are safe, you are tired, and you are home. Sink down into the softness, letting the last echoes of the Victorian world drift away like steam from a fading engine. Sleep now, for the morning belongs to a new century, but tonight belongs to peace.